Greetings, everybody. Apologies for the late start. Today, we are going to be cracking on now with Wu-Sabat Outformation classes, the hidden science and power of our breath, part 2. My name is Nabab Kaknihes, and I am a student teacher of the master teacher, or who we call the master teacher, Dr. Malachi Z. Kabina York Okran, also known to us as Baba Yananan or Baba Yanun in this day and time. So what we're going to do is do a very brief overview of part 1. And if you haven't been able to see that, you just joined us today, then part 1 is on our YouTube channel, All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands and the North. And obviously we're going through part 2 today. It is a vast subject, the breath, and maybe one where little attention in the world is paid to it. So as I say, we will cover as much as we can do today. I think the best thing that you all can do as those listening and attending today is ask questions and tease out the knowledge that potentially is in my head from the book, so that at least to say you leave here getting what you wanted out of it and your questions answered today. So thank you for your patience, and we're going to get started right now. Okay, so let's get to the start of the class. That might help us here. So what we want to do just first off is just run a quick poll. So just check that the sound and everything is working okay for everybody before we get started. So I'm launching this poll right now, and this will give you an option as well to test the system and test your system. So I'm running the first poll, which is a sound check. So I'm leaving you 30 seconds to answer that, if you can do, please. So 2 questions there. Can you hear my voice clearly? And the second question is, can you hear my voice over the background music? Okay, so I'll give you 10 more seconds. Excellent. So it's showing results to you. There's no one with any issues with the sound, so that's great. Thank you for that. And now what we're going to do is just run a visual check. So again, simply just cast your vote. Give you 30 seconds to do that. Again, not sure how you're joining us today, so obviously if you're dialing in, then you're not going to be able to see the screen, but if you are joining by a phone or a computer, you should be able to see the screen. It's got a picture of a newspaper and various different pictures on the front. Excellent. Okay, so no issues with sharing the screen. So on that side of things, okay, so let's move forward. So what we want to do in the first instance is start off the class with the positive vibes. So people are joining us. So if you are joining us, I'm just going to start off with a positive affirmation that we have in the Sabaean culture, and it's called Partakyud. And so I'm going to be chanting in the Sabaic language, and then I'll translate into English so you know exactly what is being said. Adoy kale namazorat u fakur ame kasam un empa faut. Begin all prayers and thinking as a part of all. Anuki jawef pa ashuk empa faut. Wu kale ashuk kawun jawef neya. Anuki kasam un empa faut. Wu pa faut kawun kasam un emneya. Anuki wahu ameh pa faut. Wu pa faut kawun wahu ameh neya. Nakuk kadur naju ameh kasam un empa faut. Wu habub ameh mu shahas un. Nakuk kadur kawan kaleh pafef nakuk dayur jawef pa faut. Ameh wase ameh dayarni kawun lakei bakwe jawef pa faut. Anuki abed bi nafashni pa faut kawun anuki. Pa faut kadur nakuk kadur. Pa faut amul nakuk amul. Okay, so let's take you back so we can see that just in English. It says, I am in the divine love of the all-expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am part of the all-expanding, and the all-expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all-expanding, and the all-expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all-expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all-expanding, as long as my want is to stay in the all-expanding. I am never by myself. The all-expanding is, I am. The all-expanding can, I can. The all-expanding does, I do. So that is Partakyud, the affirmation. And so we do that before every class. So just to start class with positive vibes, and obviously show our culture and the language that's been gifted back to us in this day and time by our ancestors, by way of Dr. Malachi KZ York, the master teacher, and as I say, bringing us back into our natural tones and aligning us with natural nature again in this day and time. Now, for the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time, we are using the Zoom platform and the webinar functionality within that. So just to help everybody out, if you've got any kind of messages that you need to send or technical issues, whatever the case may be, obviously you've got your audio settings here that you can use to adjust your settings depending on what device that you're using. If you are sending messages to us, then that are not questions, so it could be comments or things of that nature, then what you do is you select all panelists and all participants so that everybody can see what you're saying there, so we don't get duplicate questions or duplicate comments, and then just simply place that in the chat. So if you say any query, feedback, whatever it is, just want to say what's up, then you can put that in the message or chat area. If you've got a question, then there's two ways to ask questions in the platform today, and you've got a raise your hand feature. So if you've got a question and you want to come live, and it's not as scary as it sounds, but if you've got a question and you just want to ask it verbally, then simply raise your hand. One of the facilitators will unmute your mic, and then obviously you can ask your question and ask it to me directly. The second way, you will see this message appear on your screen. So when that happens, then simply unmute yourself to be able to speak. If you have dialed in, then you need to *6 to unmute yourself, and it's *9 to raise your hand, and then *9 to lower your hand. And again, for you guys there, just you've got the option there to raise and lower your hands. Once you've asked your question, just please lower your hand. And say if you're not as confident to come on and speak, then no, not a problem. Use the question and answer section here, and you can ask your question in written form, and one of the facilitators will ask the question for you. We won't use your full name, just your first name on the call, and just express what the question is. And obviously, I'll do my best to answer it. If it's not fully answered or you've got a further question, then by all means, just type a further question into the same area. Okay, so that's the basics of the actual Zoom platform. And as I say, we will also be asking various different questions or quizzes, so do some recap quizzes as we go through. This is a bit of a new feature started last month, so just to make sure that what we're teaching is registering, and if it's not, then it gives us an opportunity to clarify that, as I say, if anything that's maybe confusing or not fully understood. So pay attention. This is a class effectively, so it's better for you to have either a pen, paper, or some kind of device where you can take notes, record whatever questions you want, or notes that you can go away and do your own further research and seek that confirmation that it's something that you know, it's not something that you heard me say and have accepted by way of belief. Now, an introduction just to who the master teacher is, and I won't spend too long on this, and that's not to disrespect the source of this knowledge, but we obviously went through a detailed introduction in part 1. So if that's what you require, then by all means, check out part 1 of this class for an in-depth overview of introduction of who the master teacher is and what is Wu-Sabat in some detail. But Dr. Malachi Z. Kabina York Okran was born in Takoradi in Ghana in June 26, 1945, so his birthday is coming up, and has written or authored since 1963 somewhere over 1,000 books, and he's the son of Mary Abba Akran York. And as we always say in these classes, it's very important that we get an understanding of the genealogy, and that is obviously held sacred by the royal family, or the royal genes are held sacred in all of our lineage by the female or sacred feminine, and Mary Abba Akran York is the mother, also known as Fatima Miriam, born March 10th. As I say, is the person who gave birth to at least a physical vessel, the person we know today as Dr. Malachi KZ York. So that is very important in our culture. In ancient Egypt or Africa, we were matriarchal first. It was the incoming of the Anunnaki and those out of Sumer, Mesopotamia, that changed it to a patriarchal society, and then their influence on the Romans and the Greeks, and that culture, which is obviously dominating today, means that today's world is a patriarchal society, or as James Brown said, it's a man's world. However, the forces of natural nature are now returning things back to what they originally were in the cycles of existence, and so we're moving back to a matriarchal society, and we covered that a little bit last week as well with the what is called the thereafter. Thereafter is, or that time period called the thereafter, is the 2012 period, where basically the axis of the planet starts to point towards, in this particular case, towards the center of the galaxy, which, if you do your research, you'll find it as a massive black hole. And this is some of the cosmological elements that we recorded in many of our systems in ancient Africa, or Tamare, various different names it was called. So when I talk about Egypt, we're talking about the pyramid building culture, which today, that spiritual science which they were using was called Wu-Sabat, or it may translate to some degree in English as animism. Now, as I say, Mary Abbot of Dr.York, now one of our Salafu ancestors, obviously guiding us now from the other side. It's important, as I say, from a lineage point of view, to know who the woman is who gave birth, or sacred feminine is who gave birth to the teacher or leader, because that tells you a lot about who the person is or the potential that they have. His father is Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi of the royal family of Sudan. Unfortunately, was assassinated in 1970. But again, having great history, you see the name there, Al-Mahdi, and that ties into his grandfather. Let's say who we talk about significantly oftentimes in this class. But yeah, it was a master spiritualist, a master Karama. I say he drove the British and Turks out of Africa. So his father, as I say, a great individual, tragically, I say his life was cut short, but shows that he's coming from royal lineage there, from Sudan, and that country, or particularly today, obviously is immersed in the Islamic tradition. However, all religions, as we were covering last month, find themselves walking back and their birthplace in ancient Egypt or Africa. So see a picture of the Mahdi there, born 1845 to 1885, where he crossed over. Let's say a significant individual. So do your research on him. As I say, the Muslim world does not want to accept him because his freckles are too close. And this is a master teacher, Dr. Malachi said York at Kabina York or Quran at age 25. And why is that particular age significant? Well, it refers to the fact that he talks about being in-housed by a being by the name of Yanun. And yes, this may sound crazy to many, and people might, oh, what's all this rubbish, and click off at this point. But you have to understand, in our culture, we have a principle referred to in ancient Egypt as the Amun Nabab Rayay Akhakta in the language, yeah, and it's basically talking about a vehicle or a vessel that our ancestors use or create in order to convey the necessary information that we need in this day and time, and in our case, particularly to break the spell, but to realign us back to who exactly we are according to natural nature, according to natural and divine design. Understood, not necessarily what in this society the dictates of potential success and all these different things are. And as we make the point very clearly and plainly for those who think that this is crazy, although when it was in the Bible, we were happy to accept unicorns if we believed in those books. We were happy to accept people coming down, Jesus coming down on a ladder from the sky. We were happy to accept the Lord beaming down from the heavens. But then when we talk about our ancestors in ancient Egypt incarnating or being born through the womb of the woman, formulated by the feminine forces of nature, in order to restore us back from many of the injustices that have taken place because we are nature's children, then all of a sudden we sound crazy. But the point we make is that no first world people, indigenous people around the world, have been found to be digging up the bones of their ancestors through sciences called archaeology, through sciences called paleontology, to find out who they are. So the reality is, every 24,000 years, we have a different system, our own system, which talks about the renewal of our story. 1 land mile for every year, because the circumference of the planet Earth is around about 24,896 miles, varying, expands up to 902 miles in circumference. Understood. And this is why in various different cultures they talk about something coming back. In our culture, I'm not talking about how it pertains to the monotheistic religions, which are all just based on the movement of planets, different solar systems, star constellations, comets, so on and so forth, dealing with our cosmology. So yes, it sounds crazy because the Mukasu or the Caucasoid ran up ahead through the Hollywood and made movies. So when the real truth about who we are and what our doctrine is would come out, we'd sound like a science fiction movie. Yeah, when in actuality, the question or the point that we always make, well, you need to ask yourself, well, why were your ancestors who built pyramids and various other different monuments, aligning them with star constellations that are millions of light years from Earth, that could never be reached by at least modern day technology today in one human being's lifetime. Yet we were building monuments and buildings perfectly aligned with the Orion star constellation in particular, and also what they call today the Sirius star constellation. Why those two? What were they doing? What was the purpose of it? So on and so forth. Yeah, and so that you judge the tree by the fruit it bears. Yeah, and so a prolific author or teacher was needed in this day and time, as I say, because we're in the information age. Information keeping us in a certain type of formation. Yeah, and we are that form. We have been made to conform in this society to laws and rules, I should say, and the rule of law, which has taken us out of form. Yeah, have us living unnaturally. Yeah, and not optimally. Yeah, and being subject, as I say, to many of the abuses, suffering the cancer of racism, which pervades the human planet Earth today, human society all over the world. But we seem to be suffering, both as women and men, the most in that regard. So justice, or ma'at, you understand, amun Wu-Sabat, yeah, excuse me, amun Mahat Wu Amun Hatab, yeah, justice and hidden peace is what we need in this day and time, visibly and hidden. So a teacher, our ancestors, who the ancient Tamarians referred to as the Parnatharu, but their real name was the Morzaku, yeah, means or Riskians or providers, who we interpreted as sons. Yeah, that's when we saw the Natharu. That's what we thought of, suns. Yeah, the sun that you see 93 million miles away, and the many stars that you see out there in the universe and into the multiverses, so on and so forth. That is what we were dealing with. So in our story, not as opposed to his story, where we've been around for trillions of years, if you have to put a timeline on it, our story renews itself every 24,000 years. So we're coming to the end of this particular cycle. And part of that cycle is obviously the birth of various different teachers born in this day and time, and so culminating, for now at least, with Parnabab Yananan incarnated, or as one with Dr. Malachi KZ York, as one of our ancestors or elders incarnate. So we talk about principally just in this latter period about the second resurrection. So that second resurrection, about in terms of the restoration of our true spiritual science. Each of the different races out there have their own spiritual science, which brings them together, enables them to unify. Now, obviously, when these forces of nature, or natural nature, first appear, or the force of nine ether in our case first appear, they always visit the minds of their descendants first. So nothing can be done right unless the mind is right. So the mind has to be addressed first. And once the mind is addressed, then the physical unity can follow. So individuals applying the medicine or the spiritual science on themselves, having been brain dirtied, we need our brains washed of all the rubbish and the filth that we've been taught, misinformation that we've been taught over many years of our lifetime, and read the facts or factual information as it pertains to us, in order to put knowledge into a correct, logical, orderly way, so we understand the past, we understand the current and the present, so we can take better control of our destiny or our future. Yeah, we can start to guide that destination. to one of self-preservation as opposed to self-destruction. So many great teachers have come in the period, and we name a few here relevant to our journey in the last century. So the second resurrection really just deals with the fact that in the first 30 years, so when the master teacher first came in 1963, he came with what we would call as Wu-Sabat in that day and time, but the information was far too heavy for the people, our people at that time who were dealing with it. Yeah, we wanted the Bible, we wanted the Quran, we wanted something to believe in, we wanted to have faith in unseen things, so on and so forth. So he made the statement, I came giving you what you want, so you'd learn to want what I really came to give. And so we went through those first 30 years mastering the religious degrees, which to the ancient Egyptians, our ancestors, the Muhammad, that the Egyptians would have been considered to be the lesser mysteries, the baby studies of the universe. Some say Bible means basic information before you leave Earth. That's what some people say. But now, in this day and time, we understand this is not to be offensive to anybody of those religions today, but those are not our books. Yeah, so we go much further back than that. But we had to take a long walk and a short path, and that meant, as I say, going through the various different, what may be considered to be the exoteric side of religion. So here, the Torah of the so-called Judaism, the Bible of Christianity, and the Quran of Islam. And so, as I say, these would formulate the lesser mysteries, or maybe chapters of the same book, even though man is interpreted them as different religions, each one of them having an esoteric side, and all of that takes you back to ancient Sumer. So in our first 30 years, we took that long walk and a short path, and found that all roads lead back to ancient Egypt, and that the real deities of the Bible and the Quran are nothing more than extraterrestrials of the Sumerian doctrine, who in the Sumerian tablets are referred to as the Anunnaki, and have different names, as say in the Bible, El, Elohim, Anakim, Alihat in the Quran, Theos, the gods of the Bible. So here, obviously, you only know, or people who speak those, or research into those languages, and has it been translated into English, and that is the person's job title. It's not who was sitting in the seat. Understood? And so what we find is that certain characters in there, this one in particular, Nanar, his name means master of fire, is what we find that most people are, in fact, seemingly, but don't know, worshipping today. Yeah, and in so it's Bible doctrine, that would be who they're calling the devil, but the devil is God and God is the devil. There's confusion there. So as you see, Isaiah 14:12, who they say is the devil, the word devil is not used in the Old Testament. But Isaiah 14:12, the bright morning star, is this individual named Anar, and then they talk about Jesus being the bright morning star in Revelation chapter 22, verse 16. Same title, same being, same person. Yeah, at least according to them. We have a much older story where we're dealing with our version, if you wanted to call it, I don't say our version, but the original version of what you would call dealing with the Kharast or Messiah type idea, which we dealt with a little bit in part one. So it goes back over 10,500 years and has a different meaning to our people. So oftentimes when we're dealing with us, you have a 9 kind of view of things, and then we deal with them. You have a 6 view, and the 2 oftentimes are opposed to each other. One deals with life and creation, the other deals with death, decay, and destruction. You have 2 forces in nature. So we had to unlearn, in a sense, or what we had been taught. But people ask, well, why do you still use the Bible and the Quran? Well, the reason why is because the teacher called Dr. Malachi Z. Dr.York or Quran is called a doctor for a reason. Doctors are supposed to cure diseases, and in our case, the spell that we were suffering from, having particularly in the last 6,000 years, having come out of the 400-year bondage, which we're still suffering from the legacy of that today, part of the justification for that was enacted through the monotheistic religions. Yeah, remember in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, their Lord God introduced hate by putting enmity. Look up the word enmity. Yeah, hate between the seeds. That was the birth, according to their history, of racism and all the different types of isms that keeps human beings separated on the planet Earth. And how, as I say, you should ask yourself the question, well, why are these books being able to be used to justify heinous crimes like the kidnapping of our people? That was because their Lord God instructed them to do so. Yeah, and so there was their justification there. Arguably, they've gone too far, but there was a justification there. And so for us in the spiritual science of Wu-Sabat, a simple principle is identified that says that, well, the slave, and in right knowledge, the slave and the slave master cannot worship the same God, because the slave master, when the slave master calls upon God, is calling upon a force or a source of power that helps to keep the slaves enslaved. Understood. Today, it's got silly names like white privilege and different things that are maintaining that system. So the slave, or so-called slave, must seek an alternative source or force of power that would drive liberation. And so in unraveling the mess, the master alchemist, the master teacher, had to then devise a doctrine that would unravel, in a sense, and break this spell that we were suffering from. And therefore, like in any antidote, part of the poison is in the cure. Yeah, so the books of the Bible and the Quran had to be retranslated, repurposed, made fit for us to consume until we got to at least place some element of trust that would enable us to walk from history back into prehistory, and then back to, obviously, to the very beginning of things, to understand and at least be confident enough to start to accept our story. And still, even today, we have problems if we say something. People see, we think confirmation means if the white man says it or it appears in some documentary, so on and so forth. That is not confirmation. Really, we'd be seeking our confirmation in natural nature to know where something is factual or not. So the mystery of God is finished, and say actual facts. And then the second resurrection introduced a new way of life to us, known in this day and time at least as Wu-Sabat, as a culture, new language, Misbatia, or some refer to Sabatuyi, for us to speak in this day and time and elevate and connect us back to those natural tones. And the people will be known as Musbatu, or Sabians, in this day and time. Yeah. So this is this language here. I'm going to roll through this. As I say, part one, go into that in more details, this second resurrection. Okay. Right, what I'm going to do, people, I'm going to jump all the way from here now and go to the recap, because we've got a lot to cover today, and I don't want to, as I say, get into various different subjects and we don't cover what we need to today. Right, so like magic, I think this is where we got to the last time. Yeah, so the recap quiz on poll 8. So so are there any questions before I move on to the next section? Are there any questions?
There is no questions about Katni.
And no questions here.
Okay, so I will tap Twee. So, right, so in part one, we covered the science of mysticism. And so we were introducing you to the Muhammad, or the Egyptians, and the Kahanu, which was the Egyptian priests or high priests, and making the point that we had, tremendous spiritual science, alchemy, various different things back in ancient times, which, as I say, a priest in tune with the what they call pharaohs, but para, excuse me, para, Raye, para Raye aha. Yeah, so what they say is pharaoh is really it's a sort of mistranslation. It's para Raye aha. Yeah, and so that really means temple of the sun and moon. And if you translate it in Sabatic language, which is what pharaoh is, what they're saying pharaoh is. So it's a sort of pronunciation, say, of those original tones or words. And so we were expressing the fact that, as I say, part of the issue or the problem is that we were the source of many great sciences, but little known is that we are not given the credit for many things. And part of the illusion of the deceivers and the liars, we make those terms not lightly, but looking through the evidence throughout history, is that people have stolen many of our teachings, stolen many of our ways of life, our culture, and repurposed it into their own languages, into their own ways of doing things, but never given the credit back to the original source who inspired, influenced them, or even in many cases, who directly designed what they used. Yet there's been a perverse attempt really to ridicule the Egyptians or the Africans or our mysticism, even to the point where the mystics of ancient Egypt are considered to be crazy and are depicted in a very negative fashion and negative light. So when you're now starting to track back, potentially as a Nagara or person interested in Wu-Sabat, and you're trying to track back and find yourself, you encounter a lot of negative, as I say, characterizations of your ancestors in the journey to find your way home. This is why, obviously, we have to build up a very strong psychic self-defense against things and trying to find our way back home, because we encounter, like we do in life, I suppose, every day, a lot of negativity. So the illusion of the deceivers was very specific, that we touched upon in various examples, showing how, particularly in their monotheistic religions, they gave their lies validity, because nobody has found any of the things mentioned in their books. I suppose particularly the Bible, not found Garden of Eden, not found Noah's Ark. There's no evidence. It might be a great story. There's no evidence of Jesus Christ being born, so on and so forth. There's no evidence of these things. Yet the way in which they gave it validity is by saying that their prophets, even their God, came out of Egypt. It mentioned 611 times in the Bible, and that gave it validity because this was a culture that was verified, that exists, that was there. Many of the stories which they claim in terms of their interactions, you don't find the same record of that in ancient Egypt, or any record really of them. There's no Joseph record in Egypt, there's no Moses record in Egypt. What you can find is similitudes or similes or illusions or mixtures of characters that may explain itself. However, it's not the actual events. And as you know, our ancient Egyptian ancestors, we as ancient Egyptians, we recorded and wrote down everything. Hence why there's so much interest and study in our ancient culture. We also went over the principle of the smai, yeah, or samai, yeah. So hard as the samai, yeah, the complete union breath, and is where they took the word, or we see sometimes you see the word here, smai, and where they took the word yoga from. So yes, some may say, oh, that's Egyptian yoga, but as we showed, I think the last class, that it's obviously almost a contradiction in terms, and how obviously the world today knows yoga, but it hasn't got a clue that it came from ancient Africa, yeah, and was dealing with this science, say the complete union breath and the science of the breath, yeah, smile. So this is something now that obviously has to be set straight. But now, when you talk about certain principles relating to it, again, you're fighting with, and this is what we were expressing last month, you're fighting with what is considered to be established information, because you're not one of the three things. If you don't have enough authors, you don't become the authority, and then you don't decide what is or what isn't authentic. So because we don't have enough authors saying, well, the original name or the source of the science of the breath is Samai, then what happens is you have to find yourself fighting against, well, that's yoga. So you get hybrids, Egyptian yoga, which yoga is Dravidian, derivative of our science called Smai. So we need to get back to Samai, because one of the key things is, well, we have 9 glands, or excuse me, energy points based on our endocrinal glandular system, and they have 7. Yeah, so what benefits them is not going to optimize us. Yeah, so there is a separation in natural nature, and this is why races look different. They think different, they eat different foods, so on and so forth. Obviously, living in a multicultural society and having multiple choice, you get to experience many different cultures, many different things, so on and so forth. But the understanding is, we need the understanding of what is optimum for you. If you then choose to dip into other things, so be it. But let's have the full knowledge of who and what we are supposed to be first as well. So we talked a little bit about the triad principle and the triad of teaching, which is something mentioned heavily in the breath book, and went through a number of different triad examples. If you want to know more about that, we can get into. Please ask questions. Go into that too much detail. There are many triad principles. Remember, Sabaeans are factologists, dealing with facts. We are ontologists, so we're seeking to get to the source of a thing, and we deal with numbers, so numerology as well as one of our 3, I suppose, principles as a student teacher, or as I say, a standard national or whatever, in terms of what they're seeking, in terms of their evolutionary pathway. So the triad principle, obviously one of the key triads is Asar, who they call Osiris, Ashtat, who they call Aset, and Hara, who they call Horus. Yeah, so this is leading into the fact that we have knowledge here on what is considered to be the East. You understand? In inverted commas, but obviously East is East because Africa was in the middle, and then I suppose you have East of Africa, hence why they talk about Middle East, but they don't talk about Middle West. Now, obviously we talk about East and West in terms of cultures now, and so modern day culture, maybe the dominant culture in the world today, by more the fact it's known more and it's influencing factor, not necessarily because the amount of people that are following it, but it's certainly the influencing culture is the Western culture, and that is considered to be in most cases the authority, not in all cultures, but it's considered to be the authority in the world, probably more because of their media strength around the world today. But many practices in the West are devoid of the knowledge of the East. Yeah, so that ancient knowledge has not been able necessarily, or not been used by those who control modern story or history today to influence and build that bridge between what took place prior to let's be honest, Mukasu or Kakasnadu, the Caucasoids, coming around 6,000 years ago. They have not really integrated well, as I say, the first world people with current world people today. So even to the point where Africa and other places of ancient source of knowledge are considered to be third world countries and not first world countries, insofar as obviously but they were here first. so that knowledge, as I say, has not been shared and passed on. So we have Eastern practices that are having now to influence the West, and periodically the West dips in to that Eastern knowledge, but it usually never gives credit to the source of where certain things came from. It's always somebody who's invented a new invention, If you remember, you see African women, in West African culture, you see them all over Africa, but you see babies wrapped in cloths, babies sometimes around the mother's back, tightly tied in. Some mothers doing various different tasks, whatever, with the baby strapped to the front and to the back. And then, this then gets grafted into, as I say, these kind of baby carriers now. In the West, you can buy from various different places or whatever, but the credit of the influencing, because at one time they never used to carry their babies like that. Babies were in pushchairs, potentially carried in hand, but the baby's in the pushchair. Now all of a sudden, baby needs to be close here, the heartbeat of the mother, so on and so forth. And certain practices there have now been grafted in, maybe a slightly different technological application, been applied in the West, but as I say, the credit is never given. So you have to then now force ourselves in our journey way back home to deal with this particular issue. We spend some time in understanding the psychological damage and thinking of how that arises, as I say, from Eastern knowledge influencing Western knowledge. Now, the symbolism of color as well. So we were looking in part one at how colors are used, so natural colors pertaining to the breath, and how we see them permeate various different aspects within Western culture and Western society. And so it's interesting to look at some of the ways in which those colours are used, but how it all ties back into natural nature. And then finally we looked at the power of will and controlling of the breath. We'll explore that more in part two today. So that's a very quick recap of part one, and as I say, you can find that on our YouTube channel. So what we're going to do, as I did say last week, we're going to get a bit more technical today in terms of our biological understanding, or what one may call exoteric understanding, before we get into the esoteric understanding. I'll be honest with you, probably time today, we're not going to get fully into the esoteric as maybe I would have liked to, just in two parts. It's just such a vast subject. But say, ask questions, please ask questions. So if anything that you want to know, then I say it might be that we answer it directly, rather than there being some slide or whatever that's going to get into the subject. Yeah, we're going to trigger the emotion to get those answers out of me today. Obviously, at some point you'll be able to get the book in the UK, which I say should be, if it's not available now, then certainly in the coming months it will be there. Now, let's look at verse 82. So one of the things we have to realize is that when you're dealing with the input, I suppose the difference, we place a lot of importance on health, and there's a lot of practitioners, even particularly very good ones, I suppose, who have targeted and understood the failings of the European medical system, and have sort of targeted that well for the black community. And they're always fighting against the same issues that we were talking about, authority, authentic, in terms of trying to say, well, this is what you've been used to learning, and hey, but this is how we think it really goes, or whatever. And trying to get our people to listen is particularly, or can be, hard work. But what this is expressing is that basically you can survive a certain amount of time without food. Yeah, so maybe it's going to cause you a lot of damage, but you could go several days, maybe even a few weeks without food. Yeah, you'll be able to go less time without water. Yeah, so without any water, you can still survive, but your system is going to get into some serious problems if you don't take in a sufficient amount of water on a daily basis. Yeah. So food, you can survive longer. Water, less time. But how long can you survive without breathing? So in terms of importance, we've got, you should be drinking a certain amount of water every day. You should be drinking or eating certain types of food. But do we really talk, let's be honest, do we really talk about quality of breathing? Yeah, are we really taught? Were we really ever taught how to breathe correctly? I'm not sure we were. Certainly society, you'd have to go and look certain things up. Yeah, when we start to get into some of the issues, you can see how problematic certain things are. So, as it's saying there in 82, without the breath, our existence, generally speaking, or how long you're without breath for and what damage it then subsequently causes is measured in intervals of 9, 18, and 27 minutes. And as you know, if the brain is deprived of oxygen, it can cause serious damage to the human body. Although, as I say, people, some people are known to have drowned or whatever the case would be and been revived. The danger always is how long was the person out for, because, as I say, the damage to the brain in particular can be significant. So, as it's saying, Homo sapiens are not only dependent upon the breath of life, yet are largely dependent upon correct habits of breathing for continued vitality and freedom from marad disease. Yeah, so we can look at a couple of, just modern kind of diagrams here, and getting our understanding of the wonders. Let's be honest, the wonders of the human body. I think we start to get into just understanding about the respiratory system and how things work. I mean, to be honest, it is marvelous, as I say, to look at the sort of divine design of our ancestors upon Earth and how certain things have grown within nature. But here we can see quite clearly in looking at descriptions around the diaphragm and the movement of it, and the interesting fact that we've got 24 ribs and some fixed, or considered to be fixed, and then some floating. Now here you see that air is going through the mouth, and we'll talk about this in much more detail. So it's an issue about mouth breathing, and how, as I say, there's not much control in society around how one breathes. And so I think we inherently understand that we breathe, but we're not necessarily understanding how one breathes. So what we want to do is understand a little bit about these things called chemoreceptors, and I won't spoil it for you. So let's get into this video and then come out of the other side. So pay attention, take some notes, and as I say, we'll build upon this after we watch this video.
The ventral group is responsible for
Start that from the beginning. So hopefully you can hear it. Okay.
Armando Hasudungan, biology and medicine videos. Please make sure to subscribe. Join the forming group for the latest videos. Please visit Facebook Armando Hasudungan. In this video, we are going to look at control of respiration. Now, the medullary respiratory centers control respiration. The medullary respiratory centers are made up of the ventral and dorsal groups. The ventral group is responsible for the rhythmicity, you can say, of breathing. If that didn't all make sense, let's look at a diagram. So here I'm drawing the brain. If we zoom into the brainstem region here, we can locate where the medulla oblongata is. Here I'm drawing 3 red circles. The 2 red circles here make up the medullary respiratory center, which is made up of the ventral and dorsal respiratory groups. The ventral being the front and the dorsal being the back. The dorsal group is responsible for inspiration, the diaphragm, and the ventral one is responsible for the rhythmicity of breathing. But then you have this other respiratory center located in the pons, known as the pontine respiratory center. The pontine respiratory center will interact with the medulla respiratory center to smooth respiration. It will provide tonic input to the medullary network here to help coordinate smooth respiratory rhythm. So they will send signals to here, and then the medullary respiratory centers will work together, and then will send signals for inspiration and expiration. So to understand how it sends signals for inspiration and expiration, let us look at the thorax. So here I am drawing the thorax, which is made up of the ribs here, as well as the sternum here. Now within the thorax we find the lungs. Beneath the lungs we have an important muscle known as the diaphragm. The diaphragm is one of the important muscles in respiration. And then you have another important muscle in respiration, which are known as the intercostal muscles, which run between the ribs. Here I'm drawing the trachea, which connects the larynx to the lungs. So in a very simplified way, the respiratory center will send impulses to the muscles of the lungs to trigger inspiration or expiration. So for example, here we have impulses being sent via neurons to the intercostal muscles to cause inspiration. So the ribs will rise. And the impulses are also being sent to the diaphragm to cause inspiration. So the diaphragm will descend. The respiratory center will send impulses to cause inspiration and expiration. The quicker the impulse, the faster the breathing. The slower the impulse, the slower the breathing. And that's an important concept to understand. Now, let us see what can influence the respiratory center. And so what can increase respiration, so increase breathing, and what can suppress breathing, so slow down breathing. Firstly, we have the higher centers of the brain, where we can have voluntary control. So as we know, we have some control over our breathing. We can stop breathing for a while before the brain just takes over. The higher centers of the brain are also important for the perception of pain, emotion, and temperature. And so all these factors can influence the respiratory rate. So they will firstly either stimulate or suppress the pontine respiratory center, which then will stimulate or suppress the medullary respiratory center and respiration itself. But the main regulator or influencer of respiration would be the peripheral chemoreceptors, which are located in the carotid and aortic bodies. They detect changes in the blood, chemical changes in the blood. So for example, if they detect a decrease in oxygen, a decrease in blood pH, which means an increase in hydrogen ions, and an increase in CO2, this will stimulate or trigger the chemoreceptors located here in the carotid bodies and aortic bodies, and they will stimulate these chemoreceptors to stimulate the respiratory center. And so when the respiratory center is stimulated, there'll be a quicker respiratory rate. So you will breathe in and breathe out quicker. And so you can breathe in more oxygen and you can breathe out more carbon dioxide to neutralize everything. There are also chemoreceptors located in the medulla known as central chemoreceptors. The medullary chemoreceptors do exactly the same thing. They can detect changes in pH. A decrease in pH, for example, and an increase in CO2 will stimulate the chemoreceptors to stimulate the respiratory center so that you can breathe faster, and thereby breathing out more carbon dioxide and inhaling more oxygen. You also have receptors in your muscles and in your joints, and these will be stimulated when you exercise. And so when you exercise, these receptors will stimulate the respiratory center so you can breathe quicker. And it's important to breathe quicker when you exercise so you can breathe, so that you can take in more oxygen and you can blow out all the acid that has built up. And finally, you have things in your lungs that can regulate the respiratory center, that can influence the respiratory center in the brainstem. Firstly, you have things called irritant receptors, which are receptors that are protective in the lungs, that help essentially blow off the irritant. And so when they're stimulated, they will suppress the respiratory center to slow down respiration. And then you have stretch receptors in the lungs, which cause the hearing breather reflex, a reflex that is protective. It's a protective reflex initiated by extreme overinflation of the lungs. And so when these stretch receptors are stimulated, initiated, they will suppress respiration. So they will slow down the respiratory rate. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so that should have been of interest to you. Just a little bit of an introduction. We will get a little bit simpler. Got another video just to understand the respiratory system. But there, you should have picked up that these chemoreceptors, as well as a number of other factors, are monitoring the relationship between, as I say, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and acidosis in the bloodstream, and can trigger, as I say, our brain to increase, as I say, the rhythmic control of our breathing, particularly when we're doing things like exercise, etc. So, as I say, we've got control, so our voluntary systems and mechanisms to control our breathing, and we have got involuntary systems at play as well. Now, in order for us to, we were talking about this in the previous class, or touched upon it, about the power of will, yeah, or your ego, or your ability to make decisions. So for us to get better control of our breathing and what controls our breathing, and for us to go from, I suppose, the exoteric elements of it to the esoteric elements of it, we have will. It plays an important part. And so you having a basis or understanding of what is taking place is useful for you to know how one can control the various different aspects of it, and obviously allow the involuntary aspects to work with that as well. So these are your what's considered to be chemoreceptors in more detail. They're not exclusive to the breath per se, but they are used as means or mechanisms, to say, in the function, I suppose, to detect what we're talking about in this regard. And so what's quite interesting is when you start to look them up, is that through an electron microscope, they have this hexagonal type shape. And so you can sort of see the wonders when we start to look inside of the body. Obviously, our brains have been configured in a way that human beings are able to study themselves. And so we can start to look at the inner workings of the body. Now, remember, why is this important? Well, as Sabaeans, remember, we're not space cadets. But in order to better understand the universe, the hidden science of know thyself was to know how thy body works. And because out space and in space are exactly the same. This is something that the master teacher has been conveying to us. I'm sure maybe there's other teachers who've conveyed that same principle. But as above, so below. So the extended version of know thyself is not necessarily anything to do with that history per se, but it's really you understanding, well, how does the body work? How does it function? What is its relationship to the planet? What is its relationship to the universe? What is its relationship to the sun? Looking at those systems that are replicating themselves, and you can learn as much about internally as you are out externally, because, as I say, we are a universe. Universe means diverse energy into one form, and you came from a dual verse, which was your mother and father. Understood? Yeah, you have triverses and you have their multiverses, and then you say everything, you say omniverse. Yeah, so this is a window into these systems and what they look like, why they're shaped a certain way. These things we now to start need to be showing some element of curiosity about. So what does this introduce when we're talking about? Well, in this breath scroll, it's talking about breathing with intelligence. So intelligent, we say intelligent breathing, but it said intelligent control of our breath, our breathing. Something to say absent from anything that we've been taught primarily in our society today, I suppose, unless you're involved in maybe martial arts or you're an athlete or even singing or some kind of vocal profession, acting, so on and so forth, where it requires a more specialist type of breathing. We're left to your own devices. Maybe you can ask yourself, well, why is that? So here, some important statements are being made. An intelligent control of our breathing power will lengthen our days upon Mikab planet called Taha Earth. So there is a direct correlation between how we breathe and how healthy and how long that we're going to live on this planet. Remember, take your first breath, obviously, when you're born into this world, and you exit out by taking your last breath. So when you we enter this world, when you exit this world. So there's a direct correlation between breath and life. Direct correlation. So sounds obvious, and one of the things about this class, which the master teacher makes the point, is that sometimes certain aspects of it are so simple that it can be overlooked by human beings, because we're expecting something more dramatic. We're expecting something to, I don't know, to maybe to blow our mind in a certain way or whatever. And the simplicity of it means we can overlook certain things, as I say, that we have been doing for years and never, as I say, paid the proper attention to or analysed or assessed what is actually taking place. So there's intelligent breathing or intelligent breathing control, and subsequently there is Temzahan, unintelligent or careless breathing. Yeah, because as I say, what does it do? It opens us up to poor nutrition by way of the breath, poor function by way of the breath, and as I say, we're literally breathing in disease. It's not about mask wearing, it's about how we breathe in this day and time, particularly with coronavirus. So, you know, as a being, we breathed in, we still breathe in a version of water called water vapor, but we were able obviously to breathe in water and lived as such for 9 months. Let's say underwater. So that required obviously a certain type of breathing or breath. When we were obviously exited out of the womb, we had to then adjust and relearn how to breathe. And as we can see, this beautiful sacred feminine here sleeping. If we're sleeping in the correct position, the body, unless it gets into bad habits, should breathe correctly while we're sleeping. And we understand, even though it's not everybody's favorite position, that one is supposed to sleep on their back because it puts less pressure on the organs and obviously gives us the optimum ability to breathe in the correct way and in the correct fashion. But obviously, if there's health issues, overweight, or different things of that nature, then you'll find us breathing incorrectly. One of those evidence of that is obviously snoring or making loud noise, dribbling, so on and so forth. Yeah. So, but in terms of understanding the simplicity of us as a creature in the first instance, we, as I say, we started off as reptilians. We then moved into a form of which referred to as the grey, yeah, or Ramadian, and then ended up in a more simian type shape or mammalian type shape just before we were born, understood. But this is, let's say, when we're looking at these things and how the legacy of what we've been through as people, how far we have gone away from the original. As I say, there are some key statements here which we have to kind of assess. So 88 says you lived as an aquatic creature in your mother's Raham womb for 9 months. So you see, you were a sea creature in the womb first, then a land creature. Yeah. So as we say, even in the larger context of the race, we evoluted out of the waters first. And in previous classes, check them out. We talked to you about how, as I say, we evoluted out of the waters. And came onto land in South Africa first, the Sands people being the oldest people on the planet. Our ancestors over 50,000 years ago set up bases on what is called Antarctica today, but it was a functioning continent at one time, and placed, as I say, germinated cells in the waters. Say we were sea creatures. Say the original mermen and merwomen, and the dolphin being one of our ancestors. The word dolphin, look it up, it means womb. But what was it carrying? Yeah, so dolphins, remember, defecating in the waters many trillions of years ago by design, and that led to the first protozoas on into metazoas, so on and so forth. So it's taken trillions of years of growth, as I say, to get to what we look like today. But as part of one of many projects of seeding life here on Earth, as I say, certain cells were placed in the waters of this planet, and then a tsunami caused us, or threw us, as I say, onto land, the females first, and then their lungs had to adapt then to breathe in not dense water, but what we would call less dense water, called water vapor. So we started off in the waters of this planet first. Women came out first, and then men, or what version of men, came out later on. Yeah, and that's how we, say, evolved into 4'5" females and 5'4" males, considered to be the Sands people today, the oldest, people, and that was based on, as I say, ferronucleic acid, a hominid type structure, very different to us. We are the evolutionary descendants. So ferronucleic acid gave birth to ribonucleic acid, which gave birth to, as we see us today, deoxyribonucleic acid. And so we are a combination of the ribonucleic acid and the deoxyribonucleic acid today. But however, all of that needs to be corrected and straightened out, because we are missing a key element within our endocrine glandular system, which was originally secreted by something called the peripheral gland, which has many different names today in various different cultures, philosopher's stone, monatomic elements, so on and so forth, which used to be in our, say, those parathyroid ancestors, and was secreted into our blood system naturally. Obviously, when you don't use a thing, then it becomes defunct. So we've lost that peripheral gland. It was through design and lack of poor knowledge. It's no longer in our system. The nerve endings are there. It was originally in the hippocampus area of the brain, and now must be replaced back into the submental. So this, as I say, breathing or breath, or us as water creatures onto land, still water creatures, but water creatures onto land, is part of our creation story. Now, and events. So, however, civilization has changed you in other respects. So we became a what. Now we'll become a what, as opposed to who. And we asked what we have accepted by many of the many decisions that we've made in this society today, but we're supposed to be a who. Who are we according to natural nature? Who are we according to natural nature's design? So 90, you've contracted improper methods and attitudes of mache, walking, Kayum, standing, and Galus, should be Galus double A there, Galus sitting, which has robbed you of your birthright from a reptile living in water in the womb to a mammal living outside of the womb of your fertile, natural, and saheh, correct breathing. 91, listen to this. You have paid a high price for Meirapu, Europeans' form of civilization, void of ancient breathing practices for overall health. A high price. That wasn't even on the radar of our thinking, just in terms of just breathing practices that we don't employ in today's thinking. Now, why is that? So as the average Shahas person today breathes incorrectly, resulting in a contracted chest, stooping shoulders, which has caused terrible increase in maradat, diseases of the respiratory organs. 93. The term fiteral, unnatural breathing, is a contamination of bad habits which will need a kaha'al, Munbab spiritual master to reteach them. 94. The percentage of Zazazu men and Zazaztat who breathe fatirali, naturally and correctly, is quite small. 95. It has been stated that one generation of breathers would regenerate the Salal race, and disease would be rare as to be looked upon as a curiosity. So this one is quite stunning in terms of what we're looking at here. Correct breathing would talk about the elimination of disease. Virtual elimination of disease. Now, in a lot of the books that came before, so in the Supreme Mathematics series, remember it expressed to you that Master was speaking about the fact that death is a disease that will eventually be cured. We know working on covering the chromosome means obviously when you cure all disease, then you eliminate death. Yeah, so and society may not be outwardly on the verge of resolving that particular issue, but we're not necessarily that far off in understanding what is taking place in the chromosomes or how diseases are being formulated or formed. But this again is showing, look here, about the importance of breath. So if that is the outcome of breath, you can see, well, we're not breathing properly or utilizing the faculty of semi or complete union breathing in our lives at all, and that's because of ignorance. Are there any questions before I move on?
Yes, there's a question here from Galaxy A80. And the question is, so would the practice of yoga be okay, or are there adjustments to be made?
An interesting question. I mean, it's one of those things, I'm not going to tell you don't do it, but you take your own risks. You know, we need our own stuff. And so the reality of the situation is that, you know, I would say to you, you need to seek out the breath book, which is your own stuff. I can't answer you more simply than that. Obviously, we have in this society today, we compromise, isn't it, as black people? Yeah, as Nagarnadu Negroids, we compromise in a lot. Everything we do is compromise. So the point is that yes, you could do it, and you may mentally perceive some benefit of it, but you need your own stuff. Yeah, so either if it's that important to you, then what I would do, I would seek out the breath book, which has been designed for somebody who looks like you, for you, and with you. Any other questions? Okay, so let's move on then. So 96, so whether viewed from a standpoint of east or west, the connection between correct breathing and nahab health is readily seen and explained. We'll be doing more reading. I don't usually do as much reading as this, but because we want to hit certain points in the time we've got available, we're going step by step. 97, the Eastern Muthland, Mulkanu, the triad of teachers, not only admit that their sacred brothers are right, yet also that in addition to the physical benefit, there are other benefits derived from correct habits of breathing. 98, for instance, Akal al-Saham, mental power, happiness, self-control, clear-sightedness, morals, and even spiritual growth be increased by an understanding of the science of breath. 99. Many schools of Muhammad Rach-Ach-Eg, Egyptian knowledge, have been founded upon this Muhammadu Egyptian science, and this Sahih Rach-Ach-Eg right knowledge, when grasped by the Western races and put to practical use, works wonders amongst you. So what's happening now is, I think the original breath scroll was written maybe over 20 years ago, and now obviously been revised in this day and time. And when you look at the the kind of knowledge that's available, so maybe go on YouTube and different things, you find that compared to now, at least, a lot more is being discussed around different types of breathing, very specifically. Although, as I say, it's still lacking, you're seeing more of that certainly evident to use, which is the introduction of more of the Eastern practices now permeating into the West. So 100. The thought of old Mahmat Egypt in the East and new Egypt in the West, wedded to the practice of the West, will produce worthy offspring. So, as I say, Egypt was, remember, rebirthed in the West with the coming of the master teacher and that journey from East to West. And Tamaray, which, as I say, no longer there, but was rebuilt in the West, showed that correlation, as I say, or the coming back of us, obviously, who'd been taken or migrated to the West, how that culture was now reasserting and reestablishing itself, and with the culmination of that land, which obviously got taken through the raid, but is now rearing itself now back in Trinidad, where we're reasserting, we're rebuilding and showing that we are those Mukhmatu, we are those Egyptians coming back now through the genes, and the culture is being, as I say, not just through the language and through the culture, but in order for a people to be a real people, or a nation, I should say, you must have a land. You must have a land. To be a nation, you must have a land. And so that is now coming back in the West. We've always, as ancient Africa, ancient Egyptians, remember, we have always been in the West. We've always been in the West, and our asserted Egyptian culture has been in the West. This is why you see certain cities in the Americas or on that continent have the exact same names as some of the Egyptian cities in the East or in Africa. You understand? Places like Memphis, or they say Kentucky, correct? Or is it Kentucky, or is it King Tut City? So there are certain secrets that were long held by certain of these so-called secrets, Euro secret societies, where, as I say, they were seeking to align themselves. We talked about this in part 1, align themselves to ancient Egypt, but their practices, as I say, are dealing with Wicca, which takes them back to Zoroastrianism, you understand, and fire worship. As you can see, their chief person at the moment is Nana, which means master of fire. So this work envelopes the science of Samai, originating from us, Mukhmatu Egyptians, which is the basis of all that is known to the Western physiologists, and hygienists. 102. It not only points out the way to physical health along the lines of what Western scientists have termed deep breathing, etc. 103. Yet it goes into the lesser known phase of the subject and shows Samai. The science of complete union breathing controls your body, increasing your mental capacity and developing the spiritual side of your nature by yafuh, respiring. 104. Samai science of complete union breathing practice exercises by which he or she attains control of his or her body and is enabled to send to any organ or part of an increased Saham power, life force, thereby strengthening and invigorating the part or organ. 105. Eastern teachers know that all that his Western scientific brothers know about physiological effect of yafuh breathing. 106. Yet Eastern teachers also know that the air contains more than oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. So this is this fact, and we may get onto it a bit later if we get more time. But the fact that in the breath there's a vitality in the air, there's a vitality in the air referred to as Saham. Saham, you refer to as Saham. If we get time, we can go into it in more detail. The importance, if we don't, is to understand this point, and that is the fact that we have the solar plexus is not just a web of nerves, it is actually a brain. Now, when you read Existence, How and Why, it teaches, actual fact, I think number 36, it teaches you that suns are planets with brain and blood. It's the difference between a planet, plan ET, or extraterrestrial plan, and a sun is that they have brains and blood. Not to say that planets themselves are not intelligent thinking, but when you're looking at a sun, it is not an inanimate object. It's a thinking, living, individual being. Yeah, and so when you're dealing with the fact of our solar plexus, you are talking about a secondary brain, yeah, because it's made up of the same material, or the word they use in Sabat is damar, brain. Yeah, some refer to it, so in science, as the abdominal brain. It's a secondary thinking center. Why is it important to us? Because it stores, it's one of those storage houses internally for us of Saham power. Yeah, Hindus call it prana, and Chinese or Orientals refer to it as chi, many different names, but to us we refer to it as Sakum or Saham power. Yeah, and so we have a storage center internally, which your ego and that willpower can direct that energy to various different places, which is what is being expressed here as part of that science of complete being. I understand there's a question. So can I take that question?
Yes, there are two questions.
Go ahead.
The first one is what breath book? I think they want to know whether there's one available that I can get.
Yeah, I mean, seek it out from one of the stores and the Shat in London. I think they've got a website there. So seek out the breath book. It's called the breath book. And so, yeah, seek that out. We may have them in the Midlands. It's not going to be this month, probably, as I say, if it's because of the COVID situation. If it's not July, it's certainly be August.
And also from the same person, Jean, the question is, so smoking is extremely dangerous to breath?
I think the answer to that is probably fairly obvious. Yeah. Remember, industry is putting dust into the atmosphere that affects the quality of the air available to us. Now, some people, because it doesn't affect them, and maybe get into that a bit later, because it doesn't affect them so much, they don't care. So remember, it tells you that certain habits that we have picked up, isn't it, in our time, emulating this society is detrimental. I don't care. You'd be smoking weed or smoking cigarettes. It's all adverse. It is unnatural. It's unnatural. Yeah. So and so taking on board, say, practice with other cultures, because when you understand really the kind of true purpose of what is being called religions or sa'am, opinions, as they translate in Sabaic, is that, as I say, the purpose of whatever, a prophet, teacher, whatever the case may be, being sent to a particular group of people is to teach those people how to not only align with natural nature, but how they link with their creators or their ancestors, people who, at least from a racial point of view, gave birth to them. So they then design a certain set of practices to optimize them within the environment that they've placed them within. Understood. So that is why certain practices are not, they're designed for a certain group of people. So if yoga has been designed for Dravidians, it's going to optimize them, certain things that pertain to it. I'm not saying I'm not saying it's going to particularly injure you, but it's not going to be beneficial for you. And sometimes it can cause detriment. So the master explained at one point, like Tai Chi, for example, which is known to be very good for learning about breathing or breath. But yes, so you may engage in it and do it, cool, no problem, learn about it, great. But you're going to have to adapt it now to the Tamil way, because it was designed to charge up and power up a people who lacked, understood, samai, you understand, or saham, power, storage. Understood? We were already charged up. So we didn't need to charge up through that means. We already charged, through solar panels in our eyes and other means. So already charged. So you using a mechanism that then charges you up again it wasn't correct for us. It doesn't mean that you can't learn martial arts, all that kind of stuff, the discipline of it, so on and so forth. Because maybe somebody's got that foundation, it's much easier for them to then adjust what they're doing because they've already acquired the disciplinary skills to then apply different techniques, different sciences, so on and so forth. Understood. But that's what we're facing in this day and time. You understand? And so, as I say, it's talking about a spiritual master who can guide one and say, okay, we haven't got everything we need at the moment, but in actuality, use that for now, and then we'll move on to this later. That's why you need that spiritual master, and your ancestors don't leave you without that guidance. They put somebody in there, but obviously, whether you want to accept who that person is or not, that's part of the challenges that we face in this society today. So hell no, smoking is not good in any form. Whether it's smoking weed or someone say, oh, well, it's natural, it's not natural to smoke. And damage very sensitive lungs. You want to power up, you want to get high, learn to breathe correctly. So,
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Well, it's a hand raised from Sakam Tat Hat Asat. You have the hand up. I'd like to ask.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Can you hear that rain in the background? Just to make sure it's not disturbing people.
Mm.
You can't hear it? Can you hear the rain in the background?
Now what? No.
Okay.
I can't hear it.
Okay, great stuff. Okay.
Sakam Tat Hat Asat. You can speak. Nothing there. Maybe they put it up by mistake.
Just click allow to talk. You click that?
Hold on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
I can now.
Okay, Rahul back to everyone. Yeah, my question was, did you say that the diaphragm was the storage house for the sakam?
Not the diaphragm, the solar plexus.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that, because I thought you said diaphragm, so I was getting a bit confused. So it's a solar plex.
I'm not sure if that was my error, but yeah, it's a solar plexus.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. You're welcome. So, any other questions?
No further questions on my side.
Okay,
No further questions.
So I think we did touch upon this one and say the willpower is important in being able to direct. So a good understanding for us of the involuntary and voluntary systems within the body can help us then to direct how Sachem is to be utilized. Yeah, we have a lot more control than we know, and more power than we know. So let's say. So we understand about this Sakam, or we're introducing ourselves at least to it.
Excuse me. One more question from E. Seeley.
Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
take it before you move on?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no
Right.
problem.
Let me just.
To click allow to talk.
Yeah, I'm clicking away. It's
You know what it might be? Sorry. That's our error.
Right, I've got it now. Right.
Yes, Robert, greetings. Yes, I wanted to ask this question. Can you hear me?
I can indeed, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question earlier, going back to paragraph 82, but I was having little difficulty getting through. Anyway, back to paragraph 82. Could you just explain briefly for me 9, 18, and 27? What's the significance of those? The minutes, it says, for to do with existence, I think it was.
So they're just characterization, not something that deep. They're only characterizations of the effect on the human body for the period that somebody is without breath or breathing. So at each of those particular intervals, the damage would become more significant.
Okay. When you reach those markers, those
Yes.
are the markers, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Matthew, sorry, I just made you a co-host. I think that was the problem why he's having difficulty unmuting.
There is another question.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
This is from Devante. How would we be able to direct the breath to specific organs of the body?
It is a good question. So I suppose, Devante, it would be better to get the book. So we may get a little bit of time to it today. The foundation really is to learn the SMI, complete union breath. So that is the foundation. So it's a certain type of breathing mechanism that basically is the foundation for all of the other exercises. But once one has mastered that, there are other exercises in the book that basically where one would envision utilizing the second power, using your mind, and you use your willpower then to imagine or direct the second power to the relevant organ that maybe you're trying to heal or trying to invigorate or as I say, restore or empower certain energy towards. So one would use their will or their mind power to do that by way of visualization. Okay, any other questions?
No further questions.
No further questions.
Okay, so it is 107. So they know something about Sakhan power of which the Western brothers that are religions are ignorant, and Eastern teachers are fully aware of the nature and manner of handling that great principle, Nashat energy, and fully informed as to its effect upon the Khatat body and Akal mind. 108. Eastern teachers know that by rhythmical breathing, one may bring himself into harmonious tazuz vibration with Fatir al-Fatah, natural nature. Parmunthara, the overseers, aid in the unfoldment of one's latent powers. 109. They know that by controlled yafuh, breathing, they may not only cure disease in itself and others, yet also practically do away hawaf, fear, kalak, worry, nefeshnush, selfishness, emotion. You know what I'm saying? So another element to those skills, as I say, is that as we saw there, I think in the video, that basically rhythmical breathing obviously can be taken in terms of an involuntary position when we, as I say, when changes are detected in the body, but it's also something, as I say, that one learns to control. You understand? And part of that technique, or the SMI technique of that type of breath, is to get it to a point where those breathing techniques, whilst they may at first feel very unnatural, as they're practiced and done over time, they become rhythmical. Understood? And that rhythmical breathing has been expressed in 108, then can help a person to align with natural nature. And then, as we mentioned earlier, one can kick in and then direct the use of Saham, as I say, to direct the power as one method or one use of that power or energy. Understood?
There is another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
From Galaxy. Do you recognize or have heard of Dr. Muta Ashby's work on Kemetic yoga or Smai Tawi, he looks like?
When you say, do I recognize, are you saying, am I endorsing it? Is that what you're asking me? Am I endorsing the question?
I'm not sure on the context when it says, do you recognize? That's what the question says.
Well, I recognize the idea of Smai Tawi, which I think we touched upon last week, in one of our classes. As I say, the issue is that, as I say, it's not Egyptian yoga. It's just Samai, the complete union breathing. So it's not a version of. We're not looking at a version of yoga for black people. Yeah, it's not black history. It's our stuff and their stuff. This is the point I'm making to you. You understand? So maybe, as I say, as you start to walk back, we have compromises. But in the hereafter doctrine, so hereafter means when the devil's rule ended when the 9th of September 1999, and the year 2000 came in, we're now into our stuff. And so part of the journey that you had to walk in unlifting or lifting up the spell was to be able to accept or now start to look for your own stuff and accept it and be able to confirm it, so you'd be confident to use it without necessarily confirmation of others. So I'm not saying it's not good. I'm not gone into it in great detail, but even the wording, when you say Kemetic yoga, it's a little bit problematic because Egyptians wouldn't know anything about no Kemetic yoga because yoga is not Egyptian. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's not, they wouldn't have known anything about it, those kahanu, the priests, because yoga wasn't in their field of study, because they didn't teach yoga. They taught Samai. Now that doesn't mean there's not useful things in there, but you as a Sabaean are going to have to assess his works, not because if I say, well, yes, follow him, he's great. No, you've got to assess the exercises, and you're going to have to do your research and determine whether it is good for you or not so good for you. You're going to have to make those decisions by using your knowledge questions and your reasoning capabilities and abilities. Yeah. Otherwise, if I say yes, it is, then it's just a belief system. We're trying to get you back to the original. You understand? We're trying to get you back to the original. So the book that has been designed for you in mind is the breath book. It has been tailored for your physiology and your, as I say, your spiritual aspects of you, the 9 principles of you. That book has been designed for that purpose. And not to say there's no other books out there that you can't learn from, but that book has been designed for that purpose. Obviously, if you want to test Muata Ashby, then you're going to have to question Muata Ashby about what he has written. It's only fair, isn't it? Question him as to what he's written in that book and see whether or not it aligns with what you know is beneficial for your system in this day and time. Okay, so let's some good questions coming through. So let's test your knowledge a bit now. See if we've been paying a little bit of attention here. So nine short questions, people. 9 short questions from this section. So do your best, answer all of those, and then we'll run through the answers, and then we'll get into the next section. Okay, right. So hopefully you all can see that on the screen. Some of these, if you weren't here for part 1, just use your best guess to some degree. The others you should have been able to pick up some of these today. So just use your best guess. It's anonymous, so as I say, you ask the questions, so not necessarily tracking individuals. Also, we're not tracking, not necessarily, we're not tracking individuals. So yeah, feel free to go ahead. I'll give you 5 minutes to answer the 9 questions. I think I was speaking without. I was on mute, isn't it? Oh dear. All right, let's go through that again. Right, okay, so let's do that again. Okay, so part 2 of that, because I was on mute, unfortunately. So let's go through that again. So basically, question number 1, what item of clothing was worn by the high priests and the pharaohs? So that was leopard skin, so which is the correct answer there, which the majority of people got that correct. So well done to you. So question 2, what is the function of a chemoreceptor in the context of breathing? And the most popular answer was they detect increased levels of CO2 in the blood and alert the brain's respiratory center to increase speed and depth of breathing. That is correct. So well done to those who answered that question. Question 3, Samai, which is the science of breathing, is divided into several branches, but ranges from, and everybody seemed to have picked, or those who answered the question at least, seemed to pick control of the body, spirit, and the soul in union. A nice sounding answer, but it's not the correct answer. The range is the control of the body and the highest attainment of one's spiritual development. So we've got the physiological element of breathing, and then we've got the esoteric development of breathing. And so those are the 2, that is the range that we're looking at between when we're dealing with the science of the breath. For optimum health, would you advise, question 4, for optimum health, would you advise someone to breathe in their own nose, but only if they have large nostrils? Nose only. So great that everybody didn't choose mouth, but nose only is the correct answer. So irrespective of nostril size, you want to breathe through your nose as your primary position. And then what are the primary colors connected to the breath? Well, the clue there was primary colors, so that the answers would be blue, red, and yellow. Yes, so those should be the correct answers there. So we've got time. We'll have another poll after the next section, just to say to help retain the knowledge and see, make sure you're paying attention, not falling asleep. Right, okay, so let's move on then.
There's a question just pertaining to about, it says, this is from Devante again, the master teacher taught us to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. Would this be classed as a part of Samai?
I'm going to say yes. So yeah, obviously that's one of several different breathing exercises that one can do. So one of the things, once the foundation, I say, is the Samai breath, and then within that, obviously, you've got a number of different exercises that one can do for different purposes. One of the benefits, however, of proper breathing is it is basically you are exercising one's internal organs. So in society, particularly in the West, we place a lot of emphasis, don't we, on getting bigger muscles, whatever, getting toned. So we place a lot of emphasis on external, what we consider to be health or exercise, by training the outer part of the body. But what the breath system does is help us then to train the inside of the body, so the internal organs, by making sure that they're 100% utilized, so they become active, they don't atrophy, in a sense, i.e., because they're not being used, then they become redundant and then can get diseased. So a number of the exercises that you're looking at there, they're not only, they could be cleansing, things of that nature, but they're also designed to allow us as individuals to massage, in a sense, or exercise the internal organs of the body. So yes, it would be a part of it. Any other questions?
No further questions.
Nothing this time. Okay. All right. So let's play this video and just get into a little bit again of the respiratory system, and then, as I say, get into some details of this section.
And the carbon dioxide which is produced by the human. In this video, we will study about the respiratory system. The human respiratory system is one of the most vital organ systems of the body. We breathe about 16,000 to 24,000 times per day, which exchanges about 11,000 liters of air with the atmosphere. In this process, the oxygen of the atmospheric air is delivered to the human body, which is then utilized by all the tissues, and the carbon dioxide which is produced by the human body is exported to the lungs and then exchanged with the atmospheric air. In this video, we will first talk about the brief anatomy and physiology of the human respiratory system. Then we will discuss how the gas transport to the alveoli occurs. We will talk about how the human respiratory system works together with the circulatory system. And then we will talk about how the gas exchange happens in the alveoli. So first, coming to the anatomy and physiology of the human respiratory system. The vocal cords present in the larynx divide the respiratory tract into the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract contains structures like the nasal cavity, the pharynx, and the part of the larynx above the vocal cords. The lower respiratory tract starts with the part of the larynx below the vocal folds, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, as well as the alveoli. So let's first talk about the brief anatomy of the nose and the nasal cavity. Now, if we take a look at this diagram in a bit detail, we can see that the nasal cavity is made up of a roof, which is in turn made up of the bones forming the base of the skull. It also consists of a floor, which is made up of the palatine bones. The main job of the nose and the nasal cavity in the respiratory tract is the filtration of air. This is made possible by small, minute, hair-like structures present in the nasal cavity called cilia. The filtration of air is also facilitated by the mucus which is secreted by the nasal walls. This traps dust, pollens, as well as other pollutants present in the atmospheric air. The other job that the nasal cavity performs is warming and humidification of the air, which prevents the dryness in the respiratory membranes. Oral cavity also serves as a secondary opening for the respiratory tract. The downside of this is that there is no filtration, no humidification, and no temperature regulation through the oral cavity. But there is a plus side also, which is that the oral cavity has a wider opening, so it facilitates greater intake of air during exercise. So till now we have studied the air that we inhale passes through our nasal cavity or the oral cavity into the pharynx. So coming to the next important structure in the human respiratory tract, which is the pharynx. Pharynx is basically a muscular tube which lies behind the nose, the mouth, as well as the larynx, and it connects the oral and the nasal cavity to the larynx as well as the esophagus. Now the part in the blue you see is the part which is called the nasopharynx. This is the part which lies behind the nasal cavity. The second part of the pharynx is called the oropharynx, which is the part in the green which lies behind the oral cavity, and the third is called the laryngopharynx, which lies behind the larynx. So the air that we inhale through our nose or through our oral cavity passes back into the pharynx. When the air reaches the pharynx, it has two important structures where it can go forward. The first is the trachea, which lies in the front, and second is the esophagus, which lies at the back. Normally the air enters into the trachea because esophagus at normal conditions is a collapsed structure. One important structure to note here is the epiglottis. The epiglottis is basically a cartilaginous structure which closes the entry of the trachea and prevents the entry of food. It is an elastic cartilage which closes the laryngeal inlet and prevents entry of food into the trachea and further the lungs. The next important structure in the respiratory tract is the larynx. The larynx is located right here, and it is also known as the voice box as well as the Adam's apple. The larynx is made up of many cartilages, and the larynx contains the vocal cords. The main functions of the larynx in the human respiratory system is that it connects the pharynx to the trachea, and the second important structure is the production of sound or speech. The next important structure is the trachea. So the trachea is basically a tube-like structure which connects the larynx to the bronchi, and the bronchi in turn connect to the lungs. If we take a closer look at the section of the trachea, we can see that the trachea is basically made up of 20 C-shaped cartilages from above to below. These cartilages basically prevent the collapse of the trachea because there is a negative pressure in trachea as well as the lungs during inhalation. If you see closely, these tracheal rings are basically C-shaped. These are not completely circular because esophagus lies behind the trachea, and if these rings were circular, they would have compressed the esophagus during swallowing, and this could have led to choking. The trachea then divides into the primary bronchi. Now this is called the primary bronchi because it is the first division of the trachea. The primary bronchi then divides into secondary bronchioles, and then the secondary bronchioles divide into the tertiary bronchioles. Now what happens next is that these tertiary bronchioles again divide for about 20 divisions to form the conducting bronchioles. So you can see the tertiary bronchioles divide many times to form very small sac-like structures. The tertiary bronchioles lead into the conducting bronchioles. The conducting bronchioles then form a 4 to 5 division series of respiratory bronchioles. These respiratory bronchioles are in turn connected to the alveoli. The alveoli are sac-like structures in which the actual gas exchange happens. The conducting bronchioles are called conducting bronchioles because no gas exchange happens in them since they have large or thick walls. But respiratory bronchioles have very thin walls and some amount of gas exchange can happen in these respiratory bronchioles. But majority of the gas exchange happens in the alveoli because of their close proximity to the blood vessels. The division of the bronchioles to such an extent increases the effective surface area of the lungs. So the air that we inhale finally reaches into the alveoli. Now let's look at this diagram to understand how the respiratory system of our body works in conjunction with the circulatory system to provide gas exchange. In this diagram, you can see the lungs, the heart, as well as the circulation pool of the body, showing the deoxygenated blood in blue color, as well as the oxygenated blood in the pink color. The heart receives all the deoxygenated blood from the body through the superior as well as the inferior vena cava. This blood has a low concentration of oxygen, and this is then pumped to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. In the lungs, this deoxygenated blood is subjected to gas exchange, which converts it into oxygenated blood, which is pumped back to the heart. The heart then pumps this oxygenated blood to the body, which utilizes the oxygen present in this blood. And again, this blood is converted into deoxygenated blood, which is pumped back to the heart. The heart pumps all the deoxygenated blood to the lungs through two main arteries, the right and the left pulmonary artery. Just as we saw with the previous branching pattern, that a single bronchus almost divides 20 to 25 times before the formation of alveoli. The similar phenomena happens with the large blood vessels that enter into the lungs. These blood vessels also divide several times, which leads to formation of small capillaries that are in extremely close contact with the alveoli. Due to this, the cardiac output that comes in the large vessels divides into many small streams of blood. This leads to exposure of the 5 liters of blood coming through the heart to almost 250 to 300 million alveoli per minute. Due to this, a rapid gaseous exchange happens between the alveolar air and the blood that is exposed to the alveoli. Now let's try to understand how the actual gas transport happens inside a single alveoli. So the air that we inhale passes through our respiratory tract deep into our body into a bunch of structures called alveoli. Well, this is important to create a very less distance between the alveolar air and the blood. Now to understand this, take a closer look at this section of an alveoli which are attached to the end of a respiratory bronchiole. You can see that a bunch of alveoli are surrounded closely by blood vessels. If we take a single alveoli out of this bunch and magnify it under microscope, we can see that the alveoli is completely surrounded by a single capillary, but in reality they are surrounded by multiple capillaries to have very close contact with the blood. In these capillaries, the deoxygenated blood enters from one side, it exchanges the gases with the alveolar air, and finally oxygenated blood is released from the other side. If we take a closer look at the junction between the alveoli and the capillary wall, you can see that the green side represents the space inside the alveoli. The cells in the sky blue represent the alveolar epithelium. On the other side, we have the blood vessels which contain the RBCs, and the wall of the blood vessel is the endothelium. In between them is the basement membrane which separates these two cell layers. So you can see clearly that the air that we inhale in the alveoli is in very close proximity, which is approximately few micrometers from the blood vessel. Here comes the role of difference in the concentration of gases on either side. Most of you know that the diffusion occurs due to the difference in concentration of a substance on either side. So if we take a look at the concentration difference of the alveolar air and the blood of carbon dioxide and oxygen, we can see that the alveolar air has a low concentration of carbon dioxide as compared to the blood, which has a higher concentration, whereas opposite of that is true in case of oxygen, where high concentration of oxygen is present in alveolar air as compared to low concentration of oxygen in the blood. Due to this, the high concentration of carbon dioxide is exchanged with the alveolar air and the carbon dioxide is released outside in the atmosphere, whereas the fresh oxygen that is coming through the alveolar air is transported to the blood and the blood is made oxygenated. So the blood coming on one side of the capillary, which is a deoxygenated blood, is converted into oxygenated blood on the other side. This oxygenated blood is then sent to the heart, and the heart then pumps this oxygenated blood to whole of the body, which is then utilized. So this was a brief description of the human respiratory system. I hope you found this video helpful. Make sure to help our channel by subscribing to our YouTube channel, and also make sure to like our page for all the flashcards, mnemonics and upcoming stuff. Thank you so much for watching.
One moment. Technical issue. One moment.
I don't know what happened.
No, I've had to take it off for a second. It's frozen. So I'll just give me one moment. Okay, right. So hopefully you should have got a good understanding of the respiratory system there. So park that for the moment in the back of one's mind, and then we can start to look at where, as I say, the Eastern and Western knowledge kind of differ in approach and understanding. Okay, so this is the structure of, I suppose, the inside of our lungs. So it's kind of like a spongy.
You don't appear to be sharing your screen.
Okay. Tap tap for that one. Can you see it now?
I can.
Okay, so as I say, so it's a type of spongy type structure. So we see slightly on the left here, and I suppose to note, maybe to some degree, as we see this diagram, we've got an upper and a lower respiratory system, yeah, in terms of what contributes to the intake of air and the whole breathing process in that regard. Let's say our lungs are made up of spongy material, and the tissue is highly elastic, so obviously highly amenable, and what it needs to be, obviously, for the type of work and activity that is taking place as we, as I say, breathe on a regular basis. Obviously, in this regard, as they reported, some 16,000 to 24,000 times per day. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we're going to look at the journey of the blood. We talked a little bit about some of the colours in part one, and I suppose how they're used in a sense symbolically in many different facets of society. But obviously, when we're looking at this now, we see some of the use of colours. We see those same colours, particularly blue and red, being used. Let's say we see it in many different aspects of our society, as we touched upon in part one. Now let's look at some of the descriptions as we understand it to be, and which was touched upon a little bit in that video, and so we can try and help, I suppose, to see where some of the distinctions are between what they teach and then what us as Muhammadu Egyptians kind of adding this additional understanding from the East to supplement that which is being, I suppose, taught in the West. So here we see we learned about, so blood's accepting the heart, it's accepting blood, deoxygenated blood, as they classify it as, in the on the left side, the right side of the heart, in this particular diagram, through the or being placed in or filled up sort of right auricle of the heart, and basically here what happens is this kind of cavity or space. It's more complicated than that, but I'm giving a simple version. It gets filled up, and then what happens is the heart then squeezes it out of this cavity into the lungs area. Now, here it talks about a gas exchange. We're going to come back to this. It talks about a gas exchange. Yeah, so the blood becomes oxygenated and then is then pumped into the right hand side set of cavities within the right side of the heart, and then, as I say, that is then pumped around the body. So 5, oxygenated blood, left side of the heart, is destined for body and cells. So 6 reaches the small intestine, supplies oxygen and nutrients there. So remember, the blood cells make up about 49%. Less than 49% of the actual blood makeup. The rest of it is plasma, which is a yellow type liquid, and so the plasma is carrying nutrients, but it's also collecting waste products as well. So this is something for us to understand. So blood is not just carrying oxygen around; it is carrying other nutrients as well to different parts of all aspects of the body, but it's also then taking waste out through the blood system as well. So here we can see blood being deposited here, and then 7, it talks about, in the venous blood, so venous blood, so i.e. it's according to this, deposited its oxygen, and so now it's going back through the veins to come around again to get more oxygen. So here now is the interesting bit. So it says when the blood reaches the kidneys, waste products, excess nutrients and water are removed. The removed substances are excreted via urine, and filtered blood returns back into circulation. So the way it's kind of taught is that basically the blood is circulating around the body, and then basically it goes through the kidneys, and then this kind of cleaned blood returns back into the lung area by way of obviously the right side of the heart. And then basically the lungs function is that it basically just oxygenates the blood, yeah, in simple terms. Now, this is not what the master teacher is teaching. So, and is the interesting thing about us as Muhammadu or Egyptians now understanding why all of these comments were being made about the breath previously. They're very strong statements about it being connected to health and about what is proper and improper breathing. So we look at 131. We understand this to be, look, blood starts on its arterial journey, bright blue and rich, laden with haya, life-giving qualities or properties. So if you didn't know, blood starts off blue first. Oxygenated blood, obviously the hemoglobin in the blood, then turns, as it's expressing here, it turns red once the oxygen obviously is collected or deposited within the blood. Yep. So this is this red to kind of blue relationship in terms of the blood's colours. But let's look at this in more detail. So the blood starts on its arterial journey, bright zarek blue and rich, laden with haya, life-giving qualities and properties, only turning hamir, red, when oxygen hits true white blood capsules, which are yellow, not white. 1 hamir, red, 2 zarek, blue, 3 sapphire, yellow, which are the primary lawanat colours wajib found in your body. 132. It returns by the venous route. Yeah, so poor, blue, and dull, bringing laden down. Dull, being laden down with the waste matter of the system. So, as we say, it's collected oxygen. Yeah, it starts off blue, collects oxygen, it turns red, and then as it now moves through the body, collecting depositing its oxygen and other nutrients, and then it's collecting all the waste matter from all these different various systems within the body, yeah, in terms of its role, in terms of transporting that to various different places. So, excuse me. So when we're looking at the various different systems, yeah, we see here when it says venous blood, we see that's blue. So arguably it's describing tracks where the blood is being deoxygenated, so it doesn't have oxygen, versus an artery which is carrying or has a relationship with oxygenated blood, hence its blue and red colours. And then the capillary is, I suppose, describing some elements where there's some form of gas exchange between the two. We'll get into that in some detail. So there's many different diagrams that you will find trying to explain the respiratory system. All tend to use the same relationship between these colours. Yeah, so vessels transporting oxygenated blood. Yeah, we would describe those, I suppose, as veins and arteries. Excuse me. And then those carrying deoxygenated blood, we describe those as veins. And so here, this relationship in various different aspects of the body and exchanges. So pulmonary circulation, which is from the heart up to the lungs, and then systemic circulation is the blood traveling everywhere else, effectively. Yeah. So Again, that diagram was made nice and simple, but this is those systems much more entangled, much more realistic in terms of how they're shaped within the structure of the body. Yeah, and this is showing this exchange here. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because we're going to focus on something else. Again, we saw this in the video, so we don't need to go into that in too much detail. It's describing the gas exchange that takes place, as I say, in these alveoli in the lungs, and so the transfer of the oxygenated blood back into the heart. So what you see here in these various different systems in this diagram is within the lungs, obviously there is this exchange of oxygen and CO2. Yeah? Now, as I say, if we looked at that previous diagram, it was describing that the blood is cleaned within the kidneys. And as I say, we have a different view of how that approach works and how our system, we understand the workings of our system to be. I'll come into that in a second. So, what we see here is two different races, I suppose, and looking at their features, they are very different. Now, we talked in part one about the ridicule of those kahanu, or high priests, those Egyptian mystics, and that has obviously carried on not just to the mystics, because that mysticism then became associated with the actual name of the people. So we talk about Egyptian, now you talk about Kemetic science as opposed to mysticism. So it got transferred to the name of the people, Egyptian this, Egyptian that, Egyptian this, understood? Now, so when we look at ourselves today as Egyptians, we have also become that source of ridicule. It's not just the priests, it's the whole gambit or the race. And look at them alongside each other, they have very different characteristics. So some people say we're the same under the skin. Well, yeah, we may have similar principles of certain things under the skin, but we're not the same. If we were the same under the skin, we would be the same on the outside of the skin. So that which is taking place inside is also reflecting what is going on externally. Yeah. So if we take close attention to the nose, we see one type of nose here, which in society, some people may consider, if we're using beauty standards, more beautiful than this other type of nose. But in nature, obviously, one is, I suppose, more efficient than the other in how it takes in air. So remember, that which is genetically arguably dominant or superior is considered ugly in society, and that which is genetically inferior is considered beautiful in society. So they've done this game of, as I say, in their Bible, I think they describe it as evil fair seeming. You understand? So they've made that which is genetically efficient, they've made it the standard of beauty, and say that which is dominant, they've made it ugly. You understand? So the world does not respect our features. The world does not respect those systems in that way, and particularly in the Western Hemisphere, rather than everybody just being exactly who they are. So men have to accept, for example, that the Y chromosome is 5 times less in size than the X chromosome, and it's 2.8% less genetic material than women have. So women are genetically superior to men. It's just what it is within nature's system. Different roles, different purposes, and we need to work together in order to have harmonious living and work in conjunction with natural nature. The problem is that when you're dealing with the different races, and particularly the Caucasoid race, that they don't want to base everything on truth. Yeah? So their system is based on the wrong racism, the suppression of another race to further their race. So we've never had a proper outing of who's who on the planet Earth, how certain things work. And so what happens is when they're giving out information, a lot of the time, rather than it to be the wholeness of what it's supposed to be, it's always being curtailed. yeah, edited dictation or education. It's always being curtailed to protect their superfluous kind of image that they have presented to the world through the media, rather than just getting the facts of who everybody else is, who all are, for example, strengths, weaknesses, etc., and obviously working in conjunction with that for better liberty and harmony for all. But they want to hold back certain information for that reason. Again, we see here one type of nose, and we see another type of nose. Yeah, we see all key to the breath. Now, we see what happens again here. You understand? A trait here in history where the nose seems to be removed for a certain reason. Yeah, because some people don't want you to know that you are connected, or you are those ancient Muhammadu, you are those ancient Egyptians, without a doubt. But they don't want you to see and know this. Yeah, so basically, hateful, racist individuals decided and perpetrated. So the argument we seem to be having in the UK at the moment is about which statue should be up and which statue should not be up for various different slave traders. But the reality of the situation is, we need to move. That level of torture can't help us without the context of the greatness. So we need to be connected, and certainly the young children, young people, whatever, need to be connected back to the greatness. And more importantly, this type of hateful behavior, where basically certain people like Napoleon Bonaparte and others sought to hide the fact that blacks were those great master builders, that we were, the architects of great civilization or civilizers, who then went on to civilize others, to create great civilizations, influenced, as I say, by our ancestors, the Panatharu, that we are those ones responsible. We are those people that they venerate and celebrate in their various different museums around the world, which is obviously stolen property, ancestral disrespect. But in society today, we call it museums. So stolen goods that are allowed to be stolen, but yet you steal something that doesn't belong to you, they want to put you in prison for that. You understand? So everything really is, which is a kind of a foot on the neck to our culture. You understand? A suffocation of our culture, and our connection to the ancient past. So to us now, looking at this, knowing that this is you, we can see that this is hateful works. Simply hateful works. You understand? Jealous, hateful works. Yeah, and we see all over the world, even so much so that they've got various different theories about why it was done, as opposed to it being, based on pure wrong racism. Yeah, and see even one of the most iconic monuments there pertaining to ancient Egypt or Tamaray, as in those of the Paruti or being Power Rawat removed. Yeah, and here, interesting correlation to modern day and time, where with the police brutality and so-called Black Lives Matter movement is connected to the breath. Yeah, so in hundreds of years ago, they tried to remove the significance of our nose in that day and time, to hide the fact to our greatness. And in this day and time, the breath has become a symbol of oppression. Understand? Now, obviously, as we've expressed, the proper knowledge of breathing is part of our salvation. Yeah, the part of our elongation in life, getting back to the knowledge of how to breathe. You understand? So in two ways, they've tried to suffocate, you understand, our culture, understood, and now today they try to suffocate us through oppression. All of which, as I say, we still can't be taken out. With all of the stuff which they have done today, you still can't be taken out. You understand? Because of the fact of the matter is, we're on this class today, there's a conveyor, there's teaching, there's listening, and this information is getting out into the world, despite, you know, all that they have tried to do, even trying to take out us as Sabaeans with the raid on May 8th, 2002. We're still here. Over 250 books have still been released by the master teachers being incarcerated. You understand? So they've slowed us down. Yes, they've caused us to compromise what we have to do, but they can't stop the actual facts. They can't stop Wu-Sabat. You understand? The same way they can't stop you from breathing. But we've got to be able to breathe correctly and properly, like who we are as Muhammad, Matu, Egyptians. So, when we look at that return of the blood, you find out that it's a poor blue, dull color. You understand? A dull-like color, because it's carrying now the waste matter in the system. So, as it's expressing here, goes out like fresh water in a stream, and it returns back like sewer water. Now, they teach, well, that gets cleansed in the kidneys, but I say we're going to see that it does something slightly different. So, interesting enough, we talk about nose, but maybe not have looked up the fact that there's a science called nosology, and it's a science of disease. Yeah, phonetically sounds the same, isn't it? Nose and nosology. And it's a house of sickness, and we see that differential between this thin closed airway versus the airway that we were ridiculed for, because our big flat noses and big lips, which actually that breath or the opening of that passageway is the original pyramid. And as you know, the pyramid originally had a capstone on top. That capstone is in actuality symbolic of our third or mind's eye. And we talked about a little bit last week where the three eyes must become one. The two physical eyes and our third eye, which is linked to the pineal gland. Now, so we can see, they call him the nosologist of nostalgia, the house of sickness, because of incorrect breathing techniques related to, obviously, their genealogy, in terms of being composed of certain key animals, the porcine, as you're aware, the Homo simian, and also the Homo canine, what their Pleiadian ancestors, along with the Anunnaki, used in their development 6,000 years ago. So obviously us emulating for survival in this society, their practices, clearly we are of a different creation to them, hence a different structure and a different way, as I say, of which we should be breathing, but obviously that will apply to all other human beings also. So let's understand this. So what we're talking about here is actually there's an exchange that takes place in the lungs. A chemical exchange that takes place in the lungs and a burning that takes place. That chemical combustion that takes place when the blood basically comes in contact with the air formulates a chemical change or combustion process, like a burning, which is why when you breathe on your hand, you feel heat, which is why we are burning black. We are not only melanated black, but we are burning black, which is why when a person dies, what happens to their skin? It turns dull, isn't it? Lifeless. So this breath that we're breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, which is the proper way to breathe, it starts a combustion process. Now they say, it's a term. Spontaneous combustion is seemingly to be a myth, where people have all of a sudden caught on fire, you understand, internally. Well, how is that happening? If there's not these chemical exchange or processes coming in, is there literal fire? No, but there's a burning, which takes place, a form of combustion being spoken about here. And the interesting thing about that is that basically when waste-filled blood goes through the lungs and goes through this chemical exchange, if there's a sufficient amount of oxygen in there, the blood gets burned clean. This is why when you do some research, you'll find that some of the people on the planet with the best blood on the planet are athletes, because they're continuously engaged in anaerobic exercise, continually breathing, training, so on and so forth. And have some of the healthiest blood in combination with other things, water and other nutrients, right diet, so on and so forth. But the correct breathing is absolutely key to cleaning the blood. But they're telling us, oh, well, it goes through the kidneys. Kidneys cleans the blood. But even in the diagram here, it doesn't appear to show, let's see here, that all of the blood on its journey goes through this tract here as a cleansing process. It's not what the diagram shows. So we're led to believe, because it comes out of so-called authorized institutions, that we should accept this and not accept what we're teaching. But the reality of the situation is, and some people even discovered this for themselves. Sometimes they're feeling like they got a bit of a cold, or they're suffering or whatever, a little bit or whatever, a bit under the weather. You go for a run. You understand? Just get air into your lungs, whatever. A little bit of sort of intensive breathing if you're able to physically. Sometimes it helps that to go away. So this process is absolutely key for us. This chemical burning process through the lungs, where a sufficient amount of oxygen must be there, understood, to aid that cleansing process of the blood. So it starts off blue, travels basically into the lungs area. This chemical exchange takes place where the blood then becomes oxygenated, comes into the heart, and it's pumped around the body, delivering vital oxygen and other nutrients to various parts of the body, to all of the cells. It starts this energy exchange excuse me, with the mitochondria as well. So it needs this oxygen, as present there for life, but it also takes away these waste products. Once it then takes away all these waste products, let's say it comes back now into the heart area, and then this dirty blood is pumped into the lungs area for cleansing by way of this burning process. Understood? And as it's talked about here, that burning process releases carbonic acid. You understand? So we need a sufficient amount of that for obviously it to all be balanced out. You understand? But if that cleansing process is not done properly, is not done efficiently, is not done sufficiently, it's going to lead to disease. So this is why those statements being made earlier have 100% validity, because there's a cleansing process taking place. And the reason why we do not breathe through the mouth is because there's no filter process there. So in the video, they said, basically, yes, it was expressed, isn't it? There's no filter. But obviously, if you take it through the mouth, yes, you can take in more air. But why would you bring things straight into the internal system without the proper filtration process? It's madness. But when you look at the diagrams, it shows, you understand, it shows that breath being acceptable. To our ancestors, it was a form of bestiality to breathe through the mouth. That's how low they looked at it. To breathe through our mouth. And take all the unfiltered air, all the germs into it without it going through the nasal cleansing filtration system. Using those little hair-like substances, if you don't know, it's called cilia. You understand? Here to filter out, along with the mucus and various other things, to filter out that process. So fundamentally, you don't leave with anything else here today. You have to understand that process there and why it was so important. So important that the main structure which our people are known for is the pyramid, our nose. Any questions?
There's no questions on my side.
No
No
question.
questions here.
Maybe hold on, one hand's just gone up. Sakamta, I'll allow you to talk. Yeah. Mic's open. Sakamta, Asat, mic is open.
Okay, when she's ready to ask, then you'll acquiesce that. So lepro. So this is just showing in certain systems how there's been a lot of interest in our blood, and particularly even now these days, the plasma in our blood is of great interest. Has a cure or one of the cures for this coronavirus, where they're actually doing plasma tests. So the blood types obviously are very important. Now in England, obviously we had these two families, the Yorks and the Lancasters. So obviously they're the crests of their respective houses featured roses. Now the rose ties into leproma or leprosy, yes, which or leproma or leprosy is a result of one of the results of it is affected by the breath. You understand? Because the fact of the matter is, as I said before, we are burning black. Their lack or ability to process oxygen in that way affects the way they look, i.e. transparent or colorless in that regard, and don't necessarily have the apparatus as we have, it being called the rawah or rawah, the man that's sold to store and make use of this saham power. Understood? And so this has not only led to a lot of jealousy, but subsistence, where, as we mentioned before, those forces of the scientific aspect of religion, or the scientific meaning or definition of religion, is the interference of the dead into the lives of the living. And the dead are those forces that must subsist off of the living in order to survive. You understand? So basically, as we see here, there were certain orders set up to then seek to, as I say, subsist physically off of us. Yeah, because of their leproma or leprosy, they needed to mix in with us. And so the Order of the Red Rose, which is the Lancasters, is the one interested in securing blood or exchanging blood, more dominant blood, in order to repair their deficiencies within their physical system. Now, remember the battle between this, or the War of the Rose, what they call it, because the Yorks were hemophiliacs and therefore lacked vitamin K in their bloodstream in order to clot if they got a cut or something of that nature. And the Lancasters didn't, so they didn't want to mix with each other in that regard. But symbolically now, in this day and time, the Order of the Red Rose is those who obviously seek blood. The Order of the White Rose are seeking white blood or white semen, or we talked about it earlier, I think liquid gold, yeah, that Philosopher's Stone stuff. So they knew that at one time it was in the bodies, obviously, of our ancestors, and as it's expressing there, thus then used to chop up, dig up their bones, their bodies, crush the bones, because they thought, well, okay, if I drink the individual cells or whatever, or partake of their DNA, then I inherit their power. You understand? So they would eat our bodies or whatever, if they could, of those of power, to inherit, as they saw it, our strength, understood, and cure them of their illnesses. Yeah, but when it comes to the blood, see many different organizations out of this Lancaster Rose type thinking to seek to take advantage of our blood. And obviously, I think there's an update coming later today, I think at 5 o'clock, out of the house, Sabians. That's going to be broadcast there, which may go into some of that in more detail. Certainly about this tracing app that's being used around now, which, as I say, in the different countries around the world, different places, you know, we're going to have to navigate our way through what's the best approach. It's not everything, no, I'm not doing that. Some is best approach for what the situation is. But obviously, as it's already been identified, that track and trace also would identify different blood types in different areas. And so if certain blood types are needed, then track and trace is an easy way to say, okay, we need that blood type, we need you to come in and donate, you understand, your blood or your plasma or whatever for this particular cure. Now they can say you've got the virus or you haven't got it, you understand? How would you know? You're not going to know, you understand? But they might say to you, what the cure is, you need to donate or analyze your blood so they can take it to use it for whatever purpose, you understand, to give your blood to others, as I say, who may be suffering from the disease, and see you as a source for their cure. And so, which is, as I say, the plasma within our blood. Now, moving forward. So we look at some of the other symbolism there with the blue and the red. And so we look at, obviously, Queen Elizabeth, or some say Elizabeth. And you see, again, the two sides of the family. So mixed with whites only, or where the mother is white, and men have mixed with the mother who's white, then we see those are considered to be blue-blooded. Yeah, and so that denotes the right wing, as we see Conservative Party, Republicans in America, so on and so forth. Yeah, but if you think now, so when we look at the journey of the blood, the arterial journeys, it starts off what? Pure blue. So it's blue. It's not oxygenated, but it's not mixed. Yes, and this is where this pure blood content comes from, or you see blue-blooded. And yeah, in terms of the royals, blue-blooded, but obviously in that context, blue or royal blood was denoted to the disease of haemophilia. Understood. But you can see in the arterial journey of the blood that basically where it starts off blue, so that's pure. Then it becomes mixed, yeah, in inverted commas, with oxygen. So therefore we get what? Red blood. And so this is symbolically for them, left wing, where they've been mixed with what? Mungaru. So black mother. So this is where the person is, the male is Caucasian or Caucasoid mixed with a black woman, which obviously creates a son of man. Yeah, a son of man is by that context. Yeah, because the male, the white male, if he's not Nagaru or doesn't have Nagaru genes, then his vibrational rate is lower than that of the Nagaru female, vibrating at 5 ether, and therefore she lowers her vibrational rate to match her man. Understood? Thus, let's say, he burns out her soul in terms of that connection, and then eventually she would have to mix in with somebody who has stronger genes to then, as I say, restart that to some degree if it happens too many times. So here, this is quite significant or important. Now, the range of people who are actually on the black spectrum, so to speak, or the Nagaru section, because they only need one set of those black genes within their 4 generations to be considered on our side, but it's the mindset may not be that, you know what I'm saying, because obviously whiteness, as they would have it today, clearly is most dominant, more powerful, and people see themselves as that, even though when you really understand race and really understand how strong our genes are, who could be considered within the family of black is actually much more extensive than even we understand, or we're now starting to understand, as we really understand genes and genetics. So one set of one interaction with any of the 4 ancestors puts them with that opportunity. But whether they have the mindset now, as nature is now doing its sifting process, whether they have the mindset of a Nagaru with all the programming that's gone on, as you'd be aware, some even mixed people who consider themselves to be half and half are never accepted as white. And so some people who maybe look white would never consider themselves black. You understand? So even if they were taught the real actual facts of race, the likelihood of them acquiescing and now starting to learn, I mean, like a Nadu culture, whatever the case may be, is probably very limited, because of what they've grown up with and their ideas about race. Unless something serious happens, where, as I say, to the planet, where if there's an opportunity to leave or shift, then obviously that's why they would do it, not because their understanding of race has been enlightened and actually we're all going back to originally how everything was supposed to be. So this is, I say, quite deep how it all ties back, as I say, to the colours used in the breath, the primary colours. So, as I say, so here we also see that not only is that burning process, as I say, quite significant, if we don't breathe enough decent quality air and not breathe in properly as well, it affects our ability to digest food. So again, quite significantly, as it talks about in 159, about 27%, you understand, when the blood's properly exposed, is going to be free air or oxygen, do you understand? And this is significant, as I say, in burning, assisting with the digestion process for us to process and burn food, you understand? So it properly gets combusted, it's being converted into energy. What we don't need is being then eliminated through the waste process. So you can imagine not getting enough oxygen to deal with the digestive process, and we're not getting enough oxygen to deal with the actual cleansing process. You can see where there's a recipe for disease or poor function within the human body. You understand? And this is what is aiding now our understanding of why the breath is so important to our function, or proper breathing, I should say, is so important to our function. Just like when you found out where you need to drink a certain amount of liters of water a day. So there are kind of 5 principles that should feature, isn't it? So, and they all relate to positive thinking. So proper prayer, you understand? Again, a form of positive thinking. Proper meditation, a form of positive thinking. Drinking a sufficient amount of water, understood? Yeah, is also, as I say, part of that structure. Proper breathing, you understand, is also a part of that structure. So we've mentioned obviously the 4 there, you understand, in terms of that side of things, and obviously proper information that we need in this day and time for what we're doing. Positive thinking, you understand? So all of it, all combined, you understand, is all positive thinking in that regard. And breathing is a critical part of that reformation of our system, reformation of our structure. So now, so here we see the legacy of kidnapping. We did touch upon this earlier, but it says 173, it says imperfect or shallow breathing, only a portion of the lung cells are brought into play. So this is, and I don't know if we're going to get time to go into that in some detail today, so let's touch on it a little bit now. So if you think about it, there are 4 different types of breathing principles. Yeah, so we've got the high breathing, we've got mid-level breathing, and we've got low-level breathing. This shallow or imperfect breathing relates to how a lot of people breathe today. So when they're taking a breath, I mean, if it's through their mouth, well, it's terrible, but if you're taking in a large breath, there's a habit of where a person basically expands their chest and their whole kind of stretched shoulders or whatever raises upwards, and there's a little bit of a chest expansion. And when you look at that type of breathing, yeah, it's one of the weakest form of breathing that we can do. That's what most of us are taught. to kind of breathe and expand the chest, you understand? But it's called high level breathing, and it's basically the worst type that we can do. And the reason for that is because you're not necessarily taking in a sufficient amount of oxygen, you understand? So the higher level breathing up through your chest, this is poor, and using the shoulders, whatever, that's poor. So you try and, even now, maybe you practice, because I say we're running out of time for this class, but if you practice now, you're trying to go through and just open up your chest. Yeah, you see my breath. You can hear me taking it in. It's quite short, isn't it? Yeah. So, and then it's quite stressful if I go too hard or whatever. You understand? So it doesn't necessarily amount to full oxygenation. Now, when you go from the middle part, go slightly under the chest in the middle part, and seek to take in breath with that more dominant. So if I focus on that area, then I'm taking a little bit more air, but again, there's a much more of a restriction, understood? But actually, if I go from lower, so right from the lower part, in the sense just sort of below the stomach area, and I start to take in air and probably expand my stomach and my diaphragm from the lower point, not from the chest, you understand? Then I get a better intake of oxygen. So if you hear kind of in the lower point, now it's difficult to hear, but obviously if you take it from that lower point and you expand from the diaphragm, from the stomach area down and start the breathing there, you're able to take in a lot more air into the system. Now the Smile breath, or the complete union breath, seeks to basically combine the lower, middle, and upper breath technique into one. Yeah, when one is either sitting or standing up, it takes it all into one, in one movement. So it's not in stages like lower, middle thing like that, but actually combines it all so it feels like it's one natural breath, you understand? So if one was to start focus on their lower side, then bring it up to the middle and then to the upper, and allow expanding out, understood, but not contracting or just or moving the shoulders, that is more akin to the Smile complete union breath techniques. You combine all three methodologies, three methodologies to give you the fourth methodology, which is the complete breathing technique. Yep, so there it goes. So one is taking a lot more air in. Obviously, you can't see me doing it, but they're taking a lot more air in than simply just breathing from the top of the chest, which is that upper technique. So here, what it's explained to us is that these abnormal breathing techniques that we picked up, as I say, in in this society, particularly, as I say, we've been affected by, as I say, the slavery, because we were robbed, you understand, of much of this knowledge, as I say, was kept away from us deliberately. Some forgotten, but it was kept away from us deliberately over time. Now, many have forgotten the ways of, as I say, the East, and because they don't have the same physical structure and benefits that we get, then they place no emphasis on teaching us about it to, as I say, start to not only give us better health, but now it's starting through rhythmic breathing to activate some of our latent spiritual faculties and abilities. Yeah, so you see, abnormal breathing was adopted by the outside, from outside of Afriques or mankind. The shadow that follows upon civilizations has robbed you of your natural habit of breathing, and the Salau race as a whole has greatly suffered thereby. You understand? So this is because, as I say, where more air is being taken in, it allows oxygen to reach all parts. You're trying to use all of your oxygen to reach all part of the lungs, all part of the internal organs. And if that's not done, as I say, then they atrophy certain aspects. That's why they stop working. Understood? And this makes them then susceptible to disease. So much things, I say, we've lost through the various different kidnappings. You understand? I'm not going to say slave trade because nothing was traded, but the kidnappings that have taken place has put us in this position. How we are going to have to build back who we are. Understand? Over take at least 4 generations for us to get back to who and what we are. If we start to apply ourselves now in this generation, not everything's going to be solved in our lifetime. So we have to think longer term. You understand? That think for the race first, not just our own individual selves. Yeah. So as it's expressed in here, saying that the legacy of the kid, it said the original man, the Nagarnadu Negro, its only physical takhlus, salvation is to get back to nature. Yeah. 177. Worship, respect, love, adore, appreciate nature. 178. The true source of health and hayah, life, as the ancient Muhmatu Egyptians did. Do it and start right now. Understand? As it pertains to us getting back to the breathing. Understand the simplicity of it. And this is not saying breathing more than everything else. It's everything, combination. Excuse me. That was just get back to them 5. It was proper breathing. Yeah. Proper prayer, proper meditation. Excuse me. Exercise and drinking sufficient water. That's correct. So exercise, you understand? Yeah, and drinking sufficient water. Diet is in there also. You understand? So all of these things, to say, form a form of positive thinking, positive mental attitude. Yeah, we're going from the mind first. All of this that we're looking at here is a manifestation of divine thought. So we have to get our thoughts correctly aligned, you understand, with the mind pointing to working with the mental, and that which we're drawing down and expressing, and that which we're being impacted by in terms of our environment, we have to control. So one of the things, as I say, in the separation of, or the correct type of breathing, is control over physiology and control over the spiritual spiritual side through, as I say, the power of our will. And our ego allows us then to direct this saham, or what they call this hidden source of energy that permeates all life, and direct it to areas, I say, not only to heal ourselves, but the power to heal others also. Any questions before I move on to the next section?
There is no questions, but there is a suggestion from Jean McLeod asking you to repeat the breathing exercise. But I'm just sending a message now on how to do the exercise.
Okay, no problem. It wasn't that clear. I was probably intending to stay more away from it, but it was probably useful just even if you just understand, if you just breathe through your chest, that you've got a shortened air or ability, to say, to take in a certain amount of oxygen, even compared to just diaphragm breathing, or breathing with the diaphragm. We can take in more, but the smile breath combines all lower, mid, and upper or high breathing. This is referred to as. See somebody with their hand up. So another question there. Yeah, go ahead. If you've got a question, you want to ask a question? Edward? Okay, I'm going once, twice, then moving on. I'll see you with your hand up. But so I think you've got the ability to speak. No? Okay, all right. So, a recap quiz. So let's launch that. So there's a few questions here just to make sure we're taking in the information correctly. So let me run that. Do your best. As I say, it's anonymous, so no prizes. No prizes, but let's see how well you do. So launching that poll now. So I'll give you 5 minutes to answer that. We'll be going slightly after 4:30, so I'll probably go into 2:45, but we must finish at 2:45 because so there's I think it's an update at 5 o'clock. So I want to come off the call and get ready for that. So about another 15 minutes and we'll try and wrap this up. So 5 minutes, let's get you answering these questions. Yeah, so let's get more people say answering those just to test your understanding and learning today. Halfway through, so about 2.5 minutes left. So last minute. Okay, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so thank you to those who completed that. Let's run through the results. So you should be able to see my screen here. So question 1, what are the measured time intervals used for a person going without breath? The majority of you answered 9, 18, and 27, so that was correct, and there was a question answered about that as well. What can rhythmical breathing create? Majority answered can bring the individual into harmonious tazuz. We deliberately didn't translate that, but it means vibration with natural nature. So this answer here, the one the majority answered, is actually correct. So this was a nice answer, but obviously designed to trick you a little bit. So here, tahuz with natural nature. It says your lungs are made up of, seems everybody got that one correct, a spongy porous material, and the tissues are very elastic. So that is correct. How many lungs do you have and where are they located? So we only have 2 lungs and they are located in the pleural chamber of the thoracic cavity there. So that is the correct answer there. Really good. So how is the blood cleansed in the body? So a form of combustion in the lungs. So great, everybody got that correct. It says, what part of the journey would bright blue blood indicate? Here, some people put end of the cycle, but here, which is correct, is the start of the cycle. Yes, bright blue blood would be the start of the cycle. So what would poor dull blue blood indicate? Here, blood, majority of people answered this, and this is correct. Blood carrying waste matter collected within the system. This is correct here. So arguably, it could mean immediate, what's the word I'm looking for? Lack of iron in the blood. Yeah, I've got the wrong term there for a second. But here, as I say, is the correct answer that we're looking for. Are bigger nostrils better for breathing? I think that was a resounding yes. What is the Sabbatic word for breathing and lungs? We didn't potentially cover this, so this was best guess maybe for some. So Sabbatic word for breathing and lungs is yafuh for breathing, and ra'at twi. So the twi means jewel. So ra'at is lung. The twi means 2 lungs. Yeah, ra'at twi. So that would have been the correct answer. Yeah, so well done to those who got some of those answers correct, and appreciate it for taking part. Hopefully, as I say, give you a bit of an idea, a refresh of the knowledge in that regard. And we'll continue to do that through these classes. Just as I say, it'll just help retain a little bit of the knowledge there. So I've got 5 more minutes. So what I want to do is try and cover something significant in 5 minutes in that regard. So as I say, maybe that we've not covered everything to the fullness. So, but at the next class, I will take questions on any subject that we've covered before, as well as this one. So just to give that flexibility. So, okay. Let's move through this and get time to cover this. Right, so when I talk about the exoteric versus esoteric, when I talk about exoteric, it would basically be dealing with the external aspects of the breath. When you deal with esoteric now, you're dealing with the internal aspects, and really you're talking to more of the spiritual side of things that we obviously talked about earlier, pertaining to the use of this power referred to as sachem, and this power called sachem. Yeah, so that when you talk about esoteric and exoteric, that is the difference between the two. Some may speak in this case in terms of the physiological side of breathing, which we've covered in great detail today, and this on the more spiritual side is the esoteric side, which is more the internal. Yeah. So we did talk earlier about this hidden vitality in the air, and we would have liked to, if we had more time, go into this in a lot more detail to get you some better understanding of that. But I say maybe if people ask questions in the next class, then as I say, we can go into that in greater depth. It is a class on the mind, and we can kind of link it back to some degree, so we can continue those questions next time. Suffice to say that it's a vitality in the air, I say not often spoken about, but certainly key to us. Now, the Master Teacher, in expressing it, because there's various different ways or definitions in people define it, he said, for the purpose of the breath scroll, it should be understood that it's an energy being exhibited by all living things versus things which are not living. So living things exhibit saham, power, versus things that are not living do not exhibit it, for the purpose of understanding when we're dealing with the breath here. Now, in this diagram, we'll go through it in all detail, but the rawak, soul, or some in previous Nawak, I think Parawah, so the two souls. Got two souls and two spirits. So this one here is more associated with what we're dealing with today. They're both, everything's in combination. But the rawah, look here, it's in motion, and then we've got energy. The combination of the two gives us emotions. Remember, emotions is what? Energy in motion. So one is a source of power, one is that energy in motion, in a sense, or that provides the force of movement. Yeah, and so you have to understand the two different states. When we're dealing with the rawak as it relates to us here physically, then that process, obviously, of breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, fires up that internal sun or solar plexus, you understand? And that is almost certainly linked to the rawah, or the rawah soul. You understand that aspect of oneself? We have two spirits as well, so two souls and two spirits. So when you look at the 9 principles of a human being, this parawah or parawah, you see the breath of the living being. So people saw themselves as body, soul, and spirit, as they taught them in monotheistic religions, but in ancient Africa, now being brought into today, us as ancient Egyptians, those Muhammadu, brought into today's time, we are talking about 9 principles, or 3 times 3, understood? Starting with the overbeing, but here, as I say, the breath of the living being is dealing with specifically, as I say, this powering up, or this fire, internal sun that is powered through the breath. Which is different to other races, maybe why they don't speak about it in the same way. So we already touched upon that burning process, and obviously the link to the spiritual side of things as well through the ka'ah element. So the ka'ah element, or the spiritual side, remember, is a replication, or it mimics the physical side. You understand? Now, obviously, we descended down from that gaseous or soul state. So remember, this is the lowest, the physical side is the lowest level of vibration, and so therefore mimics that which is on the spiritual side, you understand, in that regard. So we have 99 physical elements, for example, from hydrogen, as is classified at least, down to Einsteinium in the Western Hemisphere, which ties back what they took from the 99 deities in our Ashutat, or prayer or chanting system, understood, representing the physical environment that we're in. But on the etheric side of that, on that spiritual side of that, you have etheric elements, in a sense. So they have the equivalent E1 down to E99, understood. And excuse me, this rawah, or this which is linked to the site to the saham, which we talked about earlier, as a universal storage system for that energy, for us to not only in-house or take it in, but we have the ability, as I say, to use it and store it and direct it with the power of the ego, you understand, when we're alive and living, do you understand? And so it can be, as we direct it, under our direct control, you understand? The same way we have involuntary and voluntary systems, we can control by way of our ego that power of Saham to be distributed to help internally ourselves, or even learn to, as I say, direct it to help others. And for more information, that you're going to have to get the breath scroll, or let's say ask questions either now as we're ending, or as we close out. So we'll be going to the next class just for time purposes. So I think, as we just mentioned here, so everything in Sakam power must not be confounded with the ego, the bit of the divine Ka'ah spirit in every Rawah, soul essential nature, around which clusters matter and energy. So I suppose if you were to look at, every cell is in fact a miniature solar system, and obviously at the hidden element, or what we're bringing in as we fire up all of the different aspects of the body. So our solar plexus is our central sun, internal sun. But when we're bringing in this energy through by way of the breath, remember, it's empowering and housing every cell. So every cell has its central sun. Every cell is using this Saham power, understood, which obviously can be directed. So here you see Sakam power is merely a form of energy used by the ego in its material manifestation. So as we touched upon earlier, we have the ability to direct it. Excuse me. When we pass and the ego obviously leaves the physical body, so when we're ready to transition, the ego leaves the physical body, the cells now seek to take control, or the organs will take control of the Sakam power, which is stored in the body. Understood? And as they dissipate and ashes to ashes, dust to dust, so to speak, so they're transforming or returning back to that which they came from, they will use the Sakam power and transform it into different manifestations, and this will then result in different life forms or different aspects of life being produced as a result. Understood? So whilst we're alive, living, we have control of it to utilize it as our knowledge dictates and allows. So unused Sakam power, as it says here, returns to the universal storehouse from which it came. But us being a universe ourselves, therefore we are able to store Sakam, which renders us different, as I say, to maybe the Mukas or the Caucasoid race, because we can store this power, for greater direction. Someone had their hand up with a question. Okay, so if the rogue slide in there. Right, okay, let's try and move through to a conclusion. So we're not going to get time to go through all of these. We talked a little bit about high breathing, mid breathing, and low breathing. So apologies for the rush in that regard. But yeah, we need to conclude on this one. The only point that I will say, in fact, no, we haven't got time to do that. Okay, so let's finish on this point. So what is being expressed here is the final thing is that, as I say, we did touch upon this earlier, maybe we need to finish on this point, that sometimes the simplicity of what we're speaking about and the simplicity of the breath means that we underestimate its impact on our lives. Yeah, so we'll read from 473. It says, from the standpoint of wrong knowledge alone, without reference to the Egyptian right knowledge and science, so my system breathing is of vital importance to every man, woman, and child who wish to acquire health and keep it. 474. Its very simplicity keeps thousands from seriously considering it, while they spend, fortunes in seeking health through complicated and expensive systems. Health knocks their door, and they answer not. 475. Verily, the stone which the builders reject is the real cornerstone of the temple of health. 476. The ancient Egyptian order has the key to your well-being. So the simplicity is a problem, which I say maybe people don't then gravitate to it for that reason. But this, which is the real issue, is that, well, I say issue, but it should be the foundation of health. Yeah, so the cornerstone is always the first brick or stone which is laid when constructing a building. So therefore, the breath should be, as we obviously expressed earlier, you can survive without all the others for maybe a prolonged period of time. The breath is minutes, isn't it? The breath is minutes, not days. You can survive without water for a few days. You can survive without food for even more days than that, but you cannot survive without breath for days. So really it should be the cornerstone and the starting point of all health and the outcomes that it delivers in combination with everything else that we're dealing with. And that's the simplicity of the message. And the fact that, as we expressed to you earlier, that burning process or that cleansing of the blood is derived from proper breathing. It is why you've got your big nose and nostrils, your beautiful big noses and beautiful big nostrils, understood, is to take in that air or ether and then utilize it within the body as part of that cleansing process. Inside. The final thing that I will finish with today, if I take the last few questions, I'll finish before 5, there's another session starting. And I'll just show you these very quickly. So one of the things that they don't teach you in the West is about cleaning out of one's nose. You understand? So let me just share stop sharing my screen. So you can hopefully, can you see my camera? Yeah. No, so I am black. Yeah,
we can see. You can see.
Okay, right. So there are various different ways. So one can clean out. So you should really clean your nose every day. But basically a different technique. So one technique is to inhale, and this takes a little bit of practice without choking yourself. You can inhale water up your nose and then immediately expel it. You understand? This is one way to clean the nose. A more complex, but which takes a lot of practice, is to inhale the water through your nose. You take it down through the back of your throat and then spit it out through your mouth. Now that takes a lot of practice and can be challenging for some. But getting used to that basically, again, enables you to clean out the nose system on a regular basis. So as part of your washing routine, whatever the case may be, you should at least, as a minimum, inhale the water through your nose and then express it out. These are things that we learned in the religious degrees. Now, you've got this neti pot. Yeah, you can see me showing it there, which is another version you can get. I'm not promoting any particular brand, but this is also one way. You can see this here, the neti pot or the edge of it, which basically you fill this with water. Some of them come with salt. So you create a saline solution and basically you pour it through one nostril and then basically it clears out the mucus, etc., and it comes out the other nostril. Yeah, so this is a neti pot, another way of cleaning one's nostrils, nasal system, to keep that area nice and clean. And so you add kind of salt to that as well. Yeah, this is another system. Yeah, this is another system here. Yeah, which is again, as you can see, you can squeeze it there. So you fill that with water. Again, add a little bit of salt there. Sometimes comes with the bottles, and then that's going in one nostril and out of the other. So up into your system, and even can be used if you want to try that technique where you're inhaling the water up and then trying to take it through your system and spit it out through the mouth. It can be used as that, and you practice that technique to get that working. So it just gives you a bit more. If you're fearful of doing that, then that's a sort of a smaller version doing that. But I say in one nostril and also out through the other. This is just another type of system, as I say, that you can use for cleansing one's nose to aid for better breathing. Yeah. Okay, so apologies, I say, for a little bit of rush towards the end. I say it's a complex subject, and I say so much we could go into, probably even so much we've missed out to date. So seek out the Breath book. I say if you're based in the UK, I think the Shat is the ones that may have them at the moment. They're based in South London. You spell Nashat Nashat, and they have a website at .co.uk. So you can check their website. I think in the Midlands we'll be having those books, as I say, probably looking now around about August time. Our next class on the 5th of July, so in 2 weeks' time, we'll be doing the Mind series. So in a book focused on reflection and projection. I say, but if there's questions from this previous class or previous classes to that, which we've done, that people feel they want to ask, then by all means, please store them up and save them. We'll pick those up next time. Or you can email them to the email address that was in your actual invite to the seminar. So we can pick up questions from there as also. Are there any burning questions before we close out today?
Right. Jean McLeod had a question, which wanted you to look at a picture on a slide. And due to time constraints, I've asked her to hold that question till the next session.
Well, if it's quick, what's the question? Let's just do it.
I'm going to ask Jean to come on. If she'll speak. Jean, you can speak. Can she speak? I've allowed her to talk. Talking permitted, Jean.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can indeed. How are you doing?
Oh, good, because my sound wasn't working on my laptop. It was very brief because I know it's going to be more detail when we go into the class. But what it was for me, there was a picture that you showed, and where it was just after when you showed the picture of the overseer, the 3 flags, and then it looked as if it was the image, and I may be using the wrong term, because I watched it on TV yesterday to do with where they were showing the pyramids and Tutankhamun's tomb, and then there was the statue, and then there was the bird, so to speak, and the necklace, and that image was like the bird over the bed and the person on the bed. So that is significant, but I don't know exactly what it means. I know it's going to take longer to go through, but are you able to just give me 2 brief sentences about the bird over the bed and the person on the bed?
Yeah, so it's the bird. So if we look, when we look at those 9 principles that we were dealing with there, yeah, we see the yeah, and we see the ba'a. So that picture there is basically, and then the 3 travel together. So you got the you got the ba'a, and you got the ka'a, yeah, in terms of those principles. But that bird, I suppose the bird, as it's been referred to or called as, is holding the oversoul and the soul. Yeah, within a cartouche there. Yeah, see it holding there, the cartouche. So basically it's carrying the soul of the individual to higher states of life.
Carrying the soul.
Mm-hmm. So
oversoul
and soul.
Oversoul and soul. Yeah, because there was a great program on yesterday about Egypt, but it was like all the relics that they took out of, obviously, the pyramid, so to speak. And that particular, because I've seen the drawing of the bird and so forth, but I just didn't know the significance. I knew it was significant, but didn't know what it meant exactly.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, you see it quite a lot. Yeah, I think they call it the bird. The bird.
Bird.
Yeah, meaning ether.
And how do you spell that, please, quickly?
So is AKH.
AKH?
Yeah,
yes.
So that's bird, but if you do the proper, you could say ahach, which is AKH.
Okay. And another question, when it's got, because I can see blue, is that, how we've been talking about blue for the breath and so forth? Is that linked with the colors that you see on the bird as well? Because the colors are significant as well with the different colors on the bird.
I couldn't say for this diagram. Yeah, it's a good observation. I couldn't say for this diagram because, yeah, I don't know if those colours are. We're using it, but I don't know if those colours are real for the real image in a sense. So
Okay.
Couldn't confirm that, yes or no.
Right. There's one more question if you can take it now from Seeley.
Thanks for your questions, Gene.
Thank you.
You want to take one more question?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Right, it's Seeley. I'm going to permit him to talk. Right. Talking permitted.
Yeah, so he can speak. Yeah, I think giving him permission. Go ahead.
He's got to be unmute on his side, I think. Something's going on here.
He's muted himself back.
Yeah, he's not. God.
Sorry, did you want to speak, Dwamatef? Or Da'at Ma'at Afaf?
His mic's open.
He probably can't unmute himself. It depends if he's on a phone or laptop, because is it *9 to unmute? Did you say on your phone, or *6?
Yeah, it is that, yeah. I mean, obviously, I think he spoke earlier, so I think he should be okay. Maybe he did it by accident and we can't hear him. If not, you need to put a written question in.
Right, okay. We'll move on.
This case. Right, is there no other questions?
There's no other question. Just double check.
Okay, so...
No other questions.
No other questions. Okay, so as I say, yeah, I mean, it's a big subject. I suppose seek out the breath book, and hopefully when we have them, we'll obviously make them available to you. But if not, say Nashat, nashat.co.uk is certainly available in England. If you're in the States, then seek out unwbookroom.com. And you can order the book directly from there. We are, as I say, available in 2 weeks' time, and this class should be available on our YouTube channel over the next week or so. So subscribe to that channel and hit the notification button so when those new classes are popped up. As I say, anything burning, either email or, as I say, use the next class, and we'll pick up any questions from there. Because I know we did, as I say, move through it fairly quickly. But the mind is also linked to this, so I'm sure it will come up again as we talk through, particularly those maybe discussions around the esoteric side or dealing with Saham. There's certainly a lot more for us to uncover and explore in that regard. Okay, well, appreciate you all. Tawakum, which is thank you for your time today. As I say, we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Okay. All take care, and we'll see you soon.
Wadu.